The air shimmered with the soft hum of 1,000 unseen voices as Zora knelt by the great baobab tree. Her hands, warm and steady, pressed a poultice of crushed kola nuts and sage leaves onto a wounded antelope's flank. The antelope's wide eyes glistened with gratitude as it nuzzled her arm. "Thank you, Zora," it whispered in a voice only she could hear. Zora, the eldest daughter of King Diallo, had a gift like no other. She could hear the whispers of the wind, the secrets of the rivers, and the heartbeats of animals. It was said that her powers came from Kiruka, the goddess of healing, who blessed her at birth. But Zora didn't see herself as extraordinary. She only saw her duty. Just as the antelope limped away, a deafening cry pierced the serene savanna. Birds scattered, and the trees trembled as though warning of a storm. Zora's discerning gaze swept the horizon. In the distance, she saw him, Kalu, a fierce warrior from the kingdom of Mimosa. His body was tall and strong like a mahogany tree, but his face bore a storm of anger. Behind him, his horse Ease lay wounded, its leg trapped in a hunter's snare. Kalu's prideful voice carried over the wind as he yelled at the sky, cursing the gods for this misfortune. "Do you believe that shouting at the heavens will help?" Zora asked, stepping into the clearing. Her voice was calm, but her words struck like thunder. Kalu turned, startled by her quiet authority. "Who are you to question me?" he demanded. But as their eyes met, both felt a shift in the air, a pull neither could explain. Kalu stood frozen for a moment, his heart racing. He had never met anyone who spoke to him with such calmness, yet with such power in their voice. The wild winds seemed to listen to her words as if they too obeyed her. She was beautiful, no doubt, but it wasn't her looks that captivated him. It was the peaceful aura that surrounded her, as if nature itself had chosen her as its guardian. "I mean no harm," Zora said, her voice gentle but firm, walking toward Kalu's injured horse. "But your anger will not heal your companion. You must be calm." Kalu, still angry but now curious, watched as Zora knelt beside the horse. Her hands moved with the grace of the wind itself, brushing the grass aside as she carefully examined Ease's leg. Without speaking, she plucked a few leaves from a nearby bush and chewed them. When the leaves were finely ground, she applied them to the horse's wound. The horse, which had been wailing in pain, immediately settled down, as though it understood Zora's touch. She looked up at Kalu, her dark eyes filled with kindness. "Patience and compassion," she said softly, "are the true strength of a warrior." Kalu's brow furrowed. He was no stranger to battles, but this gentle woman, this healer, was a mystery to him. "You're a healer, aren't you?" he asked, his voice filled with skepticism. "How can you heal the broken heart of a warrior?" Zora smiled, her lips curling like the petals of a lotus. "I don't heal hearts, Kalu. Only love can do that." She stood up, wiping the dirt from her hands, and looked toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. "Your heart is heavy with pride, but it is not beyond healing." For the first time in years, Kalu felt a flicker of doubt. He had never been one to question his own pride, but the way Zora spoke, it made him wonder. Could it be that a simple healer, a woman so connected to the world, knew something he didn't? The next morning, the sun rose over the kingdom of Sozuri like a golden promise. Zora's village, nestled among the towering mountains and the whispering forests, was alive with the sound of morning chants. Birds greeted the new day with their joyful songs, and the river murmured as it made its way through the land, carrying the wisdom of generations past. Zora was no ordinary princess, but her royal blood did not define her. She had chosen a life of service to her people, healing not only the sick but also the land itself. That day, her father, King Diallo, summoned her to the royal court. The old palace stood tall against the sky, its golden walls shimmering like the first rays of dawn. Zora entered the grand hall, where her father sat upon his throne, his eyes filled with both love and concern. Beside him stood Prince Kokka, Kalu's older brother, who had always been a proud man, much like Kalu. "My daughter," King Diallo began, his voice steady and full of wisdom, "you are the pride of Sozuri and your heart is pure. But there are rumors that the warriors of Mimosa seek your hand in marriage." Zora's heart sank. She had never considered marriage. Her purpose was to heal, not to be a prize for any man. But before she could speak, Prince Kokka stepped forward with a smirk on his face. "The alliance between our kingdoms would bring great strength. It is time for you to choose a suitor," Princess Zora. Zora's heart fluttered with discomfort. She had heard of Kokka's arrogance, his belief that power and wealth were the only things that mattered. She knew what was expected of her as a royal, but she also knew that she could not be bound by the same rules that had governed the past. She looked at her father, who gave her a knowing nod. "I will not marry for power," she said, her voice unwavering. "I will marry when my heart finds its true match." The room fell silent. Even Prince Kokka was taken aback. King Diallo smiled, his eyes full of pride. "My daughter's heart is a treasure. No man shall claim it without first proving his worth." Zora's words echoed in the hearts of all present, and even Kalu, who had been hiding in the shadows, watching the royal gathering, felt the weight of her declaration. What would it take for him to prove his worth? Kalu returned to his kingdom that evening, his mind in turmoil. He had heard Zora's words loud and clear. She had spoken with such clarity, such wisdom, that he was no longer certain of his own beliefs. His pride had been his shield, but now it felt like a heavy burden he could no longer bear. Kalu's father, Apara of Mimosa, was a man of great influence, and he had long dreamed of uniting his people with the wealth and strength of Sozuri. He had sent Kalu to court Zora, but Kalu had never expected to be so challenged by her. That night, as he sat by the fire, he couldn't stop thinking about the healer with the compassionate eyes. What was it about her that made him feel so small, so inadequate? The next morning, Kalu made a decision. He would return to Sozuri not as a proud warrior seeking to win her heart with power, but as a humble man willing to prove his worth. He would face the test that Zora had unknowingly set before him. He would show her that he had more to offer than pride and wealth. But first, he had to learn humility. And that, he knew, would be the hardest lesson of all. Kalu set off early the next morning, determined to find a way to prove himself worthy of Zora's trust. As he rode through the dense forests of Mimosa, he reflected on the arrogance that had driven him for so long. He had always believed that power, wealth, and bravery were the only qualities that mattered, but Zora had shown him that there was something far more important: humility. His mind was filled with thoughts of how he could change, how he could show Zora that he was more than just a warrior. He was determined to walk the path of kindness, to learn the true meaning of compassion. But as he neared the border of Sozuri, he encountered a group of villagers in distress. Their crops had been destroyed by a sudden swarm of locusts, and they had no means to feed their families. The villagers were desperate, their faces drawn with fear and exhaustion. Kalu's first instinct was to leave, to continue on his way and forget about them. But then he remembered Zora's words: "Patience and compassion are the true strength of a warrior." With a deep breath, Kalu dismounted and approached the villagers. "I can help," he said, surprising even himself. He had no idea how, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. The villagers looked at him with uncertainty. He was a warrior, a nobleman. What did he know about farming or healing crops? But Kalu refused to be deterred. He spent hours working with them, digging trenches, and planting new seeds. As the sun began to set, he found himself covered in dirt and sweat, but a sense of peace began to settle over him. It was the first time he had ever felt that kind of satisfaction, knowing he had helped someone not with his strength, but with his willingness to serve. That night, as Kalu sat beside the campfire, he thought of Zora. He had not expected to feel so fulfilled by something so simple. Perhaps, he thought, this was the first step in proving his worth, not just to her but to himself. By the time Kalu reached Sozuri, his heart had changed in ways he hadn't expected. He had traveled far, helped many, and learned the value of humility and service. But as he entered the royal palace, a sense of unease washed over him. The grand halls, the golden walls, the rich tapestries. It all felt so distant from the simplicity he had come to appreciate in the villages. He had not come to claim the throne of Sozuri or to win over the princess with gold and jewels. He had come to show Zora that he was more than the prideful warrior who had first crossed her path. Zora was in the royal gardens, as she often was, talking to the trees and the animals. The sight of her, surrounded by nature, brought a sense of calm to Kalu. She was as radiant as ever, her gentle presence like a balm to his troubled soul. When she saw him approaching, she raised an eyebrow, sensing the change in him before he even spoke. "Kalu," she said softly, "I see you have been on a journey." He nodded, his voice hesitant. "I have, Zora." and I've learned more than I ever thought I would." Zora smiled, her eyes full of wisdom. "You have learned that strength is not measured by how many battles you win, but by how you serve others." Kalu was silent for a moment, feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward her for showing him this truth. "I want to prove to you that I am worthy of your trust," he said earnestly. "Not because of my wealth or my title, but because of my heart." Zora studied him for a long moment, her gaze both gentle and discerning. Then, without a word, she turned and walked toward the edge of the garden, where the river flowed peacefully. Kalu followed her, unsure of what would happen next. As they reached the water's edge, Zora stopped and turned to face him. "You have proven that you are capable of humility, Kalu. But now, you must prove that you are capable of love." Kalu's heart skipped a beat. "Love?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zora nodded. "True love is not about claiming someone, it is about understanding them. You must understand my heart, just as I am beginning to understand yours." For the first time in his life, Kalu felt truly vulnerable. He had always been so sure of himself, so certain that he could conquer anything. But now, standing before Zora, he realized that love was not something that could be won by force or strength. It had to be earned, slowly and with patience. "I will prove myself, Zora," Kalu said quietly. "I will show you that my heart is worthy of your love." Zora smiled, a smile that made Kalu's heart race. "Then, Kalu, let us begin." As days passed, Kalu found himself drawn deeper into the rhythm of Sozuri. He spent time with Zora in the gardens, learning about the plants and herbs she used to heal, and listening to the stories she shared about her life. He observed the way she spoke to the animals, how they seemed to trust her and respond to her with affection. It was clear to him that Zora's heart was as vast as the savannah itself, filled with kindness and compassion. But Kalu was still unsure of how to prove himself to her. He had shown her his humility, but he knew that was only the beginning. There was still something he needed to do, something that would demonstrate his commitment to her and to the kingdom of Sozuri. One day, as they walked through the forest together, a sudden storm broke out, dark clouds rolling in and thunder rumbling through the sky. The wind howled, and the trees swayed violently. Zora's calmness was the only thing that seemed unaffected by the storm. She reached out and touched a nearby tree, murmuring words that Kalu couldn't understand. The wind stopped, the rain slowed, and the storm cleared as quickly as it had come. Kalu was amazed. You stopped the storm?" Zora nodded, her face serene. "The storm was a test, Kalu. A test of your heart. The storm comes when we are out of balance, but when we act with compassion, the storm calms." Kalu took a deep breath, realizing that the test was not over. It wasn't enough to simply show humility. He had to prove that his heart was truly balanced, that his love for her was pure and unselfish. "Zora," Kalu said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I'm ready for whatever comes next." Zora smiled, and in that moment, Kalu knew that his journey of proving himself was far from over, but it was a journey he was willing to take. As the weeks passed, Kalu found himself changing in ways he had never imagined. No longer was he the proud, arrogant warrior who had come to Sozuri, seeking to claim Zora's heart with power and wealth. Instead, he had become someone new, someone who sought to understand, to listen, to heal. But despite the changes within him, a quiet tension still lingered between them. Zora, with her kind heart and wisdom, was still cautious, still unwilling to let down her guard fully. She had her own reasons for keeping her distance, reasons Kalu had yet to uncover. One evening, as the moon rose high in the sky, casting its silver light across the land, Zora invited Kalu to the royal palace's inner garden. The air was cool and filled with the scent of jasmine and lavender, and the stars seemed to sparkle like diamonds in the night sky. At the center of the garden stood an ancient tree, its branches stretching toward the heavens, a tree said to be sacred to the gods. Beneath it, Zora had placed a moonstone, an ancient gem that held mystical powers. "The moonstone is a gift from the gods," Zora explained, her voice soft and reverent. "It reveals the true nature of the heart. The one who holds it will see the truth within themselves and in others." Kalu was intrigued but uncertain. And what truth will it reveal? Zora met his gaze, her dark eyes filled with mystery. "It will show if you are truly worthy of my heart." Kalu's breath caught in his throat. He had known this moment would come. but he hadn't expected it to feel so real. His heart raced as he reached for the moonstone. As his fingers brushed its surface, a warm glow enveloped him, and for a brief moment, he saw visions, flashes of his past, his pride, his arrogance, and then his transformation. He saw himself helping the villagers, serving others, changing for the better. When the glow faded, Kalu looked up at Zora, his eyes wide with understanding. "The truth," he whispered, "is that I have learned to love, not out of duty, but out of the deepest part of my heart." Zora smiled softly, her gaze warm. "And now you see, Kalu, that love is not about claiming what you desire, but giving all that you have to the one you love." Kalu nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. For the first time, he felt completely vulnerable, completely open. "I have given you my heart, Zora. It is yours, if you will have it." Zora's eyes glistened, and for a moment, Kalu thought she might speak, but instead, she reached out and placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "You have proven yourself, Kalu. Not with force, not with pride, but with kindness and patience." The night felt still, as if the entire world was holding its breath. But just as the moment seemed to reach its peak, a loud crash echoed through the garden. They both turned, startled. The peaceful stillness of the garden shattered as Kalu and Zora spun toward the source of the noise. From the shadows of the trees, a group of masked men emerged, their movements swift and silent, like the wind before a storm. Kalu's warrior instincts kicked in, and he immediately moved to protect Zora. But she stopped him with a firm touch on his arm. "Wait," she whispered, her eyes scanning the intruders. "They are not here to harm us." The leader of the group stepped forward, pulling off his mask. His face was familiar, too familiar. It was Koka, the Prince of Mimosa, Kalu's older brother. "Kalu," Koka said, his voice cold, "I didn't expect to find you here. It seems our paths are destined to cross again." Kalu's heart sank. He had known Koka was ambitious, but this betrayal was something he had not anticipated. "What are you doing here?" Kalu demanded, his voice sharp. "I've come to claim what is mine," Koka replied, his eyes glinting with cold determination. "Zora's heart, and the throne of Sozuri. You've wasted enough time playing the noble fool. It's time to take what should rightfully be ours." Zora stepped forward, her calm presence a stark contrast to the growing tension. "Koka," she said, her voice firm, "you will never win my heart with power or threats. True love cannot be claimed through force." Koka laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the garden. "Love? You speak of love, but all that matters is control. The throne, the riches, the land, all of it belongs to me." Kalu, his heart heavy with disappointment, stepped forward. "You're wrong, Koka. You've always been wrong. Love isn't something you can possess. It's something you give." But Koka was unmoved. "You've become weak, Kalu. But I won't waste time arguing with you. This kingdom will fall under my rule, with or without your help." As the tension between the brothers grew, Zora stepped between them, her hands raised to signal peace. "You misunderstand, Koka. The heart of a kingdom cannot be won through force. It must be earned through wisdom, compassion, and humility. You have none of these." Koka's eyes flashed with rage, and he raised his hand to strike. But before he could move, Kalu stepped forward, his voice steady and strong. "If you want this kingdom, Koka, you'll have to defeat me. But know this, if you continue down this path, you will lose everything that truly matters." A fierce silence hung in the air, and for a moment, it seemed as though a great storm would break loose. But then, unexpectedly, Koka's expression softened, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He looked at his younger brother, his eyes filled with a mix of anger and regret. "You're right," he muttered, before turning on his heel and disappearing into the shadows with his men. Zora turned to Kalu, her heart heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. "We are not finished, Kalu," she said softly, "but the path ahead is clearer now." Kalu nodded, his resolve stronger than ever. "I will fight for you, Zora. Not for power, but for love." The days that followed the confrontation with Koka were filled with uncertainty. The shadow of betrayal still loomed over the kingdom, but Kalu's heart had never been more certain. He knew now that the true victory was not in defeating enemies or claiming thrones, but in earning the trust of those who mattered most. Zora, too, had her own battles to fight. She had always been a healer, a protector, but she was learning that sometimes the greatest act of healing was to trust, to open oneself to love, even when it was uncertain. As the full moon rose once more over Sozuri, Kalu stood beside Zora in the royal gardens. The moonstone, which had once tested his heart, now lay in her hands, glowing softly in the night. "Zora," Kalu said, his voice filled with love, "I am no longer the man I once was. You have changed me, made me whole again. Will you accept my heart?" Zora smiled, the moonlight catching the softness of her features. "You have proven yourself, Kalu. And it is not just your heart I accept, but your journey, your growth, and your willingness to love." With those words, the storm within Kalu's heart calmed, and in its place, a quiet peace settled in. The kingdom of Sozuri would face many challenges in the years to come, but for the first time, Kalu felt ready to face them, not with pride or arrogance, but with the love and humility he had learned through Zora's teachings. And as the stars twinkled above them, Kalu and Zora knew that the greatest victory had already been won. Not through battles, but through the strength of their hearts. The days after the confrontation with Kaka passed quietly, but the peace in Sozuri was fragile. Kalu could feel the weight of the storm still in the air. The kingdom, though peaceful on the surface, was not free from threats. Threats that had been lurking in the shadows for a long time, threatening to tear apart everything they had fought for. One morning, as the sun cast golden light across the palace grounds, Kalu received troubling news. A messenger, out of breath and with wild eyes, arrived at the gates of the palace, shouting that the village of Shikoka, near the border of Sozuri, was under attack. The enemy was a group of mercenaries, led by a mysterious woman who was said to possess dark magic, someone who could rival even Zora's powers. Without hesitation, Kalu gathered his soldiers, ready to protect the kingdom he had sworn to defend. But Zora, sensing the urgency in the air, met him at the gates. Her eyes were filled with concern. "Kalu, this isn't just about protecting the kingdom anymore," she said, her voice serious. "The enemy leader, she's not just after land or power. She wants to take something far more dangerous." "What?" Kalu asked, feeling a sudden chill run down his spine. "She wants to steal the heart of the kingdom," Zora replied softly. "And she believes she can use dark magic to do so." "The moonstone, Kalu. It's the key." Kalu's eyes widened. He hadn't realized how dangerous the moonstone truly was, how much it was coveted by those who would use it for evil. Zora had always kept it close to her, protecting it with everything she had. But now, the dark forces were aware of its power, and they would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. "We have to act fast," Kalu said, his voice firm with determination. "I will protect you, Zora. We will stop this before it's too late." But Zora's face was troubled. "It may already be too late," she whispered. "The woman leading the attack is someone I once trusted. Someone I thought was a friend." Kalu's heart sank. "Who is she?" Zora looked away for a moment, as though searching for the words. "Her name is Osha. She was once my closest confidant, my sister in spirit. But somewhere along the way, she became consumed by her desire for power, and she turned to the dark arts to gain control over the forces of nature. I tried to stop her, but she betrayed me. And now, she's back with a vengeance." Kalu's heart raced, knowing the gravity of the situation. Osha wasn't just an enemy. They shared a personal history, a deep connection that made this battle even more complicated. "We need to find her," Kalu said, "and stop her before she can use that dark magic to destroy everything we hold dear." Kalu and Zora quickly made their way toward Shikoka, the distant sound of drums echoing through the air. As they neared the village, the smoke from burning homes filled the sky, and the once thriving fields lay in ruin. The people of Shikoka were scattered, hiding in fear, and the mercenaries had already begun looting the village. But amidst the chaos, Kalu could sense something else, something darker. The air felt thick, heavy with magic, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble with each step they took. The presence of dark forces was undeniable. As they reached the village square, the leader of the mercenaries stepped forward. She was tall, dressed in black robes, her face covered by a veil. There was something unsettling about her presence, a coldness that radiated from her very being. But Kalu's eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, he recognized the face beneath the veil, Osha. "Zora," Osha said, her voice smooth and serpentine, "I knew you would come." But I see you have brought a warrior to protect you. How quaint." Zora stood tall, her voice calm but filled with sorrow. "Osha, I never wanted this for you. I never wanted to fight you. But if you're here to destroy everything we've built, I will stop you." Osha laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "You think you can stop me? You are weak, Zora. I have embraced the power that you abandoned, the power of darkness, of true control over nature. And now, the moonstone will be mine." Kalu stepped forward, his sword drawn. "Not if I have anything to say about it." But Osha raised her hand, and the ground beneath their feet cracked open, sending a wave of dark energy that knocked Kalu and Zora off their feet. The mercenaries surrounded them, but Osha's magic was the real threat. She was using the moonstone to harness powers that Kalu had never seen before. "Zora," Kalu shouted, struggling to rise. "The moonstone. She's using it against us." Zora's eyes flashed with understanding. She knew the true power of the moonstone and how to wield it, but she also knew the danger it posed if it fell into the wrong hands. As Osha stepped forward, ready to strike, Zora made a decision. With a cry, she reached into the earth and summoned a wave of light, pushing the dark magic back. The two forces collided in a brilliant explosion of energy, and the very earth seemed to shake. For a moment, the world stood still, as if waiting for the outcome of the battle between light and darkness. Osha staggered back, clutching the moonstone tightly. "You think you can stop me? You are nothing but a fool, Zora." But Zora's voice was steady, filled with strength. "No, Osha. I will stop you, and I will do it without destroying the world you sought to control." With that, Zora raised her hands, and a brilliant beam of light shot forth, striking the moonstone and breaking its dark hold. The energy dissipated, and Osha fell to her knees, the dark magic vanishing from her grasp. As the battle subsided and the dust settled, Kalu and Zora stood together, watching as Osha struggled to rise, her face twisted with fury and disbelief. The mercenaries, realizing their leader's defeat, began to scatter, leaving the village behind in chaos. Kalu turned to Zora, his heart heavy with the realization of what had just happened. "Is it over?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Zora nodded, but her expression was not one of victory. "No, Kalu. It's not over. Osha may have lost the moonstone, but the darkness inside her is still there. And I fear it's only just begun." Kalu took her hand gently. "We'll stop her. Together. We've already faced so much, and we've won. We can win again." But Zora's gaze was distant, her mind already working through the next steps. "We cannot defeat darkness with force alone. It must be healed, understood, and let go. And that will take time." As the sun set over Shikoka, Kalu knew that this battle was far from over. But he also knew that with Zora by his side, there was nothing they couldn't face. Together, they would fight not just for the kingdom, but for the hearts of all who believed in love, compassion, and light. In the days that followed, Kalu and Zora worked tirelessly to rebuild Shikoka, bringing the villagers back together, healing the land with the magic of the moonstone, and restoring hope where darkness had once reigned. But even as the kingdom began to heal, Kalu couldn't shake the feeling that something was still lurking in the shadows. He and Zora spent many quiet nights in the palace gardens, talking about their future, about the love that had blossomed between them despite the trials they faced. But there was always an undercurrent of unease. Osha's betrayal had shaken them both, and Kalu knew that she would not give up easily. "I promise you, Zora," Kalu said one night, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "we will defeat whatever comes next. I will stand by you, no matter what." Zora smiled softly, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And I will stand by you, Kalu. Together, we are stronger than anything that tries to tear us apart." With that promise, Kalu knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But with love, courage, and a heart full of hope, they would face whatever came next, knowing that together, they could conquer any darkness. As the kingdom celebrated the rebuilding of Shikoka, Kalu and Zora knew the respite was temporary. Zora's dreams were filled with visions of shadows creeping into the edges of her world. She often woke in a cold sweat, her heart pounding as she clutched the moonstone, now encased in a protective talisman around her neck. One evening, while tending to the palace garden, Zora felt an unusual stillness. The birds stopped singing, the breeze died, and the once vibrant plants seemed to shrink back as if in fear. She turned quickly, her heart thudding, to find Osha standing there, her eyes glowing unnaturally bright. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" Osha said with a smirk, her voice calm yet chilling. Zora stood her ground, though her heart raced. "Leave, Osha. You've caused enough pain." Osha stepped closer, her movements deliberate. "Pain? You have no idea what pain is, Zora. You took everything from me. My chance to be the healer, the one who saves and protects. Instead, you were chosen, and I was left with nothing." Zora's voice softened, her compassion shining through. "You were never left with nothing. You had gifts, Osha, but you let jealousy blind you." "Don't preach to me," Osha spat, her calm demeanor cracking. "This kingdom will burn, Zora. And when it does, I'll take the moonstone and rebuild it in my image." Before Zora could respond, Osha vanished into a swirl of dark mist. Zora clenched the talisman around her neck, her resolve firm. She knew this was just the beginning. Kalu found Zora in the garden moments after Osha's disappearance. Her pale face and trembling hands told him everything he needed to know. "She's back," Zora whispered. "And she's more dangerous than ever." Kalu frowned, his mind already formulating a plan. "We can't let her gain any ground. The people have only just begun to heal, Zora. We must act now." Zora nodded, her voice steady despite her fear. "The moonstone is her target. If she gets it, she'll unleash chaos. We need to protect it, and everyone in Sozuri." The next morning, Kalu called a meeting of the kingdom's leaders. Warriors, elders, and even the villagers gathered in the grand hall, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Kalu addressed them with the confidence of a true leader. "We face a great threat," he began, his voice echoing through the hall. "But we are not helpless. Together, we can protect our land, our families, and our future. Osha seeks to divide us, but we will stand united." Zora stepped forward, her presence commanding. "We must be vigilant. Osha's magic is powerful, but so is the light within us. Together, we can overcome her darkness." The hall erupted in cheers, the people's spirits bolstered by their leader's courage. But as Kalu and Zora locked eyes across the room, they both knew the battle ahead would test them in ways they could never imagine. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Kalu trained his warriors tirelessly, while Zora worked with the village healers to fortify defenses through both strategy and her unique abilities. The moonstone, now carefully protected in Zora's talisman, became the heart of their resistance. But whispers of dissent began to ripple through the kingdom. Late one evening, as Zora worked in her healing hut, a bird fluttered in, its feathers ruffled with distress. The bird, an old friend named Nkem, chirped urgently, "Beware, Zora. All is not as it seems in your council." Zora frowned, her fingers pausing over the herbs she was grinding. "What do you mean, Nkem?" "There are those among your allies who have been swayed by Osha," Nkem warned, his sharp eyes glinting. "She's planting seeds of doubt, offering power to the weak-hearted. You must tread carefully." Zora felt a pang of sadness at the thought of betrayal within their ranks. But she straightened her shoulders. "Thank you, Nkem. I will be watchful." The next day, Zora confided in Kalu, sharing the bird's warning. Kalu's jaw tightened, and his eyes burned with anger. "If there are traitors among us, we'll find them," he vowed. "But we must tread lightly. If we act too soon, we may lose trust among the others." Zora nodded, but her heart was heavy. Trust, once broken, was nearly impossible to mend. Despite their suspicions, Kalu and Zora kept up appearances, continuing to rally their people. But tension brewed beneath the surface. One evening, during a council meeting, a disagreement erupted between two leaders, Chief Lejugo and Elder Azabo. "We cannot keep relying on magic to save us," Chief Lejugo exclaimed, his voice rising. "We need weapons, not spells." Elder Azabo frowned deeply. "Magic is what has kept us safe so far. Without Zora's gifts, we would have fallen already. Do not dismiss what you do not understand." Kalu, sensing the growing divide, raised his hands to calm the room. "We will use every tool at our disposal," he said firmly. "Magic, weapons, strategy. We need all of it to protect our people. Let's focus on unity, not division." But Lejugo's expression remained stormy, and Zora caught a glint of something unsettling in his eyes. Later that night, as she walked through the palace gardens, she overheard hushed voices. "She's too powerful," one voice whispered. "If she falls, the kingdom falls with her." Zora's heart sank. The shadow of betrayal was no longer just a whisper, it was becoming a reality. The night after overhearing the whispered conversation, Zora couldn't shake the unease creeping into her heart. She confided in Kalu, who listened with a grave expression. "Someone in the council is conspiring against us," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. "We must find out who before it's too late." Kalu placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure this out together, Zora. But we can't let suspicion cloud our judgment. If we accuse the wrong person, we risk dividing our people further." Zora nodded, but her thoughts remained restless. She decided to turn to her trusted allies in nature. At dawn, she ventured into the forest and called upon the spirits of the trees. Their deep, ancient voices hummed in her ears. "The one who betrays you hides behind a mask of loyalty," the trees whispered. "But their heart is darkened by fear and greed. Watch for the signs, they will reveal themselves soon." Returning to the palace, Zora shared the cryptic message with Kalu. Together, they decided to quietly observe the council, looking for anything suspicious. The stakes had never felt higher, and the weight of their responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. As preparations for the looming battle with Osha intensified, tension among the council grew. Chief Lejugo, once a vocal supporter of Zora and Kalu, became increasingly distant and argumentative. At one meeting, he stood abruptly, slamming his fist on the table. "This is madness," he roared. "We cannot win against Osha's forces. We're throwing away our lives for a lost cause." Elder Azabo glared at him. "And what would you suggest, Lejugo? Surrender? Hand over the moonstone and let darkness consume us?" Lejugo's lips pressed into a thin line, and he stormed out of the room without another word. Kalu's eyes followed him, suspicion flickering in his gaze. After the meeting, he turned to Zora. "I don't trust him," he said bluntly. "He's been acting strangely ever since Osha returned." Zora frowned. "He may be afraid, but fear doesn't always mean betrayal." That night, however, her belief in Lejugo's innocence was shaken. While walking through the palace corridors, she spotted him slipping into a secluded chamber. Curious, she followed, keeping to the shadows. Inside, Lejugo stood before a mirror, speaking softly into its surface. The reflection shimmered, and to Zora's horror, Osha's face appeared. "You've done well, Lejugo," Osha purred. "Keep sowing doubt among the council. Soon, they'll turn against Zora, and the moonstone will be ours." Zora's heart raced. She had her answer, but the betrayal cut deeper than she expected. The following morning, Zora told Kalu what she had witnessed. His face darkened with anger, but she placed a hand on his arm. "We can't act rashly," she said. "If we expose him now without proof, we risk further division." Kalu nodded reluctantly. "What do you suggest?" Zora's eyes sparkled with determination. "We'll set a trap." They called for a council meeting that evening. Zora, calm and composed, began the discussion by sharing a fabricated vision she had received. "The spirits have warned me," she said, her voice steady. "Someone close to us has betrayed the kingdom and is working with Osha." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air. Lejugo shifted uncomfortably in his seat but said nothing. Zora continued, her gaze sweeping the room. The spirits also revealed that the traitor would reveal themselves when confronted with the truth. She held up a small crystal, a harmless bauble, but one she claimed would react to the betrayer's presence. She walked around the room, holding the crystal near each council member. When she reached Lejugo, he flinched visibly, his eyes darting nervously. Kalu seized the moment, standing abruptly. "Lejugo, do you have something to confess?" he demanded. The room erupted into chaos as Lejugo stammered, his face pale. Finally, he broke. "I had no choice," he cried. "She threatened my family. Osha forced me to help her." Though his confession was met with outrage, Zora's heart ached for him. She knew Osha's manipulations ran deep, preying on people's fears and weaknesses. But Lejugo's betrayal couldn't go unpunished. "We'll decide your fate tomorrow," Kalu said firmly. "For now, you'll remain under guard. Lejugo's confession sent ripples of unease through the kingdom, but it also served as a rallying cry. The council, shaken by the betrayal, banded together with renewed determination. Zora and Kalu used the opportunity to strengthen their unity, emphasizing that only through trust and cooperation could they overcome Osha's forces. In the days that followed, Zora worked tirelessly to fortify the kingdom's defenses, both magical and physical. She visited the villages, healing the wounded and inspiring hope among the people. Kalu, meanwhile, led intensive training sessions for the warriors, pushing them to their limits. Despite the challenges, there was a newfound sense of purpose in Sozuri. The people, once divided by fear and doubt, began to rally around Zora and Kalu, their faith in their leaders unshaken. But Zora knew the battle ahead would test them all in ways they couldn't yet imagine. As she stood on the palace balcony one evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, she felt a mixture of hope and dread. "Kalu," she said softly, as he joined her. "Do you think we're ready?" He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "With you leading us, Zora, we're more than ready. We'll face whatever comes together." Zora smiled, but deep down, she knew the battle with Osha would be unlike anything they had faced before. As days turned to weeks, the air in Sozuri grew heavier, thick with the anticipation of the inevitable clash. Osha's dark forces began to show themselves at the edges of the kingdom. Strange occurrences were reported: crops withering overnight, animals disappearing, and shadows moving in broad daylight. Zora's nights were restless. The spirits of the forest visited her often, their warnings growing dire. "The time is near," they whispered. "Osha's power grows, and she will not wait much longer to strike." Kalu, sensing her unease, tried to reassure her. "Our people are stronger now. The council is united. Whatever she throws at us, we'll face it head-on." Zora nodded, but she couldn't ignore the pit in her stomach. She decided to visit the sacred cave where the moonstone had first been found. Perhaps the ancient spirits there would provide answers. The journey to the cave was perilous. Accompanied by Nkem, the talking bird, and a few trusted guards, Zora ventured deep into the forest. As they neared the cave, the ground trembled, and a dark mist began to swirl. Nkem chirped nervously. "She knows you're here." Zora tightened her grip on the talisman around her neck. "Then we must hurry." Inside the cave, the air buzzed with ancient energy. The spirits greeted Zora, their voices echoing through the chamber. "You seek answers, child of light. But what lies ahead cannot be avoided. Trust in your gifts and remember, sometimes the greatest power is hidden in the smallest act." Zora left the cave more determined than ever. She didn't fully understand the spirit's message, but she knew it would guide her in the days to come. The attack came just before dawn, catching the kingdom off guard. A dark army, led by Osha's shadowy minions, descended upon the outer villages. Their approach was swift and ruthless, leaving destruction in their wake. Zora and Kalu were awakened by the panicked cries of the palace guards. "The villages are under attack," a guard shouted. Kalu sprang into action, rallying the warriors. "We move now," he commanded. Zora, clutching her talisman, followed close behind, her heart racing. When they arrived at the battlefield, the sight was harrowing. Villagers fled in terror as shadow creatures tore through homes and crops. Zora wasted no time, using her magic to create protective barriers around the fleeing villagers. "Kalu, take the warriors and drive them back," she shouted. "I'll handle the wounded." Kalu nodded, his sword gleaming as he led the charge. Zora moved swiftly among the chaos, healing those she could and guiding others to safety. The creatures, sensing her power, began to converge on her. But Zora stood firm, her talisman glowing brightly. She chanted an incantation, and a wave of light burst forth, scattering the shadows. The villagers cheered, their hope rekindled. By sunrise, the dark army had been driven back, but the cost was heavy. Many were injured, and the villages lay in ruins. Kalu, bloodied but unbroken, approached Zora. "This was just the beginning," he said grimly. Zora nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "She's testing us. But we won't falter." The aftermath of the attack left Sozuri reeling. The villagers worked tirelessly to rebuild, their resilience shining through the devastation. Zora, while tending to the injured, noticed an unusual pattern among the survivors. Those she had previously healed seemed to have a faint glow about them, a residual mark of her magic. Late that night, Zora sought out Kalu in the war room. "I've discovered something," she began, her voice steady. "The people I healed are stronger now. Not just physically, but their spirits. They're more resistant to Osha's darkness." Kalu's brows furrowed as he considered this. Could this be the key to defeating her? Empowering the people, not just protecting them? Zora nodded. "It's possible. But it means I'll need to focus all my energy on healing and fortifying the villagers. You'll need to lead the charge without me." Kalu hesitated. "Zora, you're our greatest strength. If something happens to you," she placed a hand on his arm, her eyes soft yet determined. "Kalu, this is bigger than either of us. If we can give the people the power to resist her magic, we might have a chance." Reluctantly, Kalu agreed. Over the following days, Zora worked tirelessly, infusing the villagers with her magic while Kalu led rigorous training sessions. Little did they know, Osha was already preparing her next move. Despite Lejugo's confession and imprisonment, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that Osha still had eyes and ears within the kingdom. Her suspicions were confirmed when Kem returned from a scouting mission with alarming news. "She's watching you, Zora," the bird whispered urgently. "Someone close to you is feeding her information." Zora's stomach churned. "Another traitor?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Kem bobbed his head. "Yes. They meet her in secret, just beyond the forest. Tonight, you'll see for yourself." That night, under the cover of darkness, Zora and Kalu followed Nkem to the forest's edge. They crouched behind the thick foliage, their breaths shallow as they watched a figure step into the clearing. The moonlight revealed Elder Azabo, his expression tense as he approached a dark mist. From the mist, Osha's form emerged, her sinister smile sending chills down Zora's spine. "You've done well, Azabo," Osha purred. "Soon, the kingdom will crumble, and you'll have the power you desire." Zora felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but Kalu's hand on her arm stopped her from rushing forward. "We need proof," he whispered. "Let him lead us to the heart of Osha's plans." The two remained hidden as Azabo handed Osha a scroll, a detailed map of the palace and its defenses. Zora's heart sank. With this information, Osha could strike at the very core of their kingdom. As the meeting ended and Azabo disappeared into the night, Kalu turned to Zora, his jaw set. "This ends tomorrow," he said. "We'll expose his treachery before it's too late." The next morning, Zora and Kalu summoned the council for an emergency meeting. They concealed their knowledge of Azabo's betrayal, waiting for the right moment to act. The tension in the room was palpable, each council member on edge after the recent attack. Kalu stood, his voice firm. "We have discovered a plot against the kingdom, a traitor among us." His words sent ripples of shock through the room. "This person has been feeding information to Osha, putting all our lives at risk." Zora stepped forward, holding up the scroll that Azabo had handed to Osha. This map was found in Osha's possession. It details our palace defenses. Only someone with access to this council could have provided it. Azabo shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but his voice was calm when she spoke. "And what proof do you have that it was I who gave this to her?" Zora smiled faintly, holding out her talisman. "This talisman not only protects, it reveals truth. Shall we see what it has to say?" As she chanted a spell, the talisman glowed, its light casting shadows across the room. When the glow reached Azabo, it grew brighter, illuminating him with undeniable evidence of his guilt. The room erupted into gasps and angry murmurs. Azabo's composure shattered, and he rose abruptly. "You don't understand," he cried. "I did it to protect us. Osha promised me power to defend the kingdom. I never wanted this." His words fell on deaf ears. Kalu's voice was cold as he spoke. "You've endangered everything we fought for. Guards, take him away." As Azabo was led out of the room, Zora's heart was heavy. Betrayal, no matter the reason, left scars that were hard to heal. With Azabo's betrayal exposed, the council grew more vigilant. Trust was fragile, but Zora and Kalu worked tirelessly to restore unity. The people of Sozuri, inspired by Zora's healing touch and Kalu's unyielding leadership, rallied together, preparing for the final confrontation. Late one evening, Zora found herself alone in the palace gardens. The moonlight bathed the flowers in silver, and the soft hum of the night brought a brief moment of peace. But her thoughts were restless. "Why do you seem troubled, child?" came a familiar voice. It was Nkem, perched on a low branch. Zora sighed, sitting on a stone bench. "So much depends on us, Nkem. I fear I'm not strong enough to face Osha." The bird fluttered down beside her, tilting his head. "Strength isn't always about power. You have something she doesn't. Love, compassion, and the trust of your people. That is your true strength." Zora smiled softly, her heart lightened by Nkem's words. She knew the final battle would test them all, but she was determined to face it with courage. The night stretched on, and Zora gazed at the stars, silently praying for guidance. Somewhere in the shadows, Osha was waiting, her dark magic growing stronger with each passing day. But Zora knew that as long as there was light, there was hope. As the sun rose over Sozuri, a strange stillness hung in the air. Zora, now attuned to the rhythms of nature, felt the unease deep in her bones. The wind carried whispers, fragmented words that only she could hear. Danger. Imminent. Prepare. Rushing to Kalu, she found him strategizing with the warriors. "Something is coming," she said urgently. "The spirits are warning me." Kalu looked at her, his eyes serious. "Do they say when or how?" Zora shook her head. "No, but it's close. We must strengthen the defenses, and I need to cast protection over the palace." The day was a whirlwind of activity. Zora gathered herbs and sacred items, preparing a spell that would shield the kingdom from Osha's growing influence. Meanwhile, Kalu instructed the warriors to double their patrols and prepare for any unexpected attacks. As Zora worked, the spirits whispered again, but this time with clarity. "She seeks the talisman. If she takes it, all will be lost." Zora clutched the talisman tightly, her resolve hardening. She knew now that Osha's true goal was to claim the source of her power. If she succeeded, Sozuri would fall. Realizing they couldn't win this battle alone, Zora and Kalu decided to seek help from neighboring kingdoms. They sent messengers to allies far and wide, calling for aid in the fight against Osha's dark forces. One kingdom responded swiftly, Kiroshu, ruled by Queen Nila, a formidable leader known for her wisdom and strength. She arrived with a battalion of warriors and greeted Kalu with a firm handshake. "We stand with Sozuri," she declared. Zora felt a surge of hope at Queen Nila's arrival. Together, they discussed strategy, pooling their resources and knowledge to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. That evening, Zora and Queen Nila shared a quiet moment in the palace garden. "You're brave, young healer," the queen said. "But bravery alone won't win this battle. Trust in those around you. Even the smallest act of kindness can turn the tide." Zora nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She was reminded once again that unity and love were their greatest weapons against the darkness. In the dead of night, when the palace was cloaked in silence, a shadow slipped through the outer gates. It moved unnaturally, as if gliding across the ground, leaving a trail of cold air in its wake. Zora, in her chambers, awoke with a start. The talisman around her neck was glowing faintly, warning her of danger. She rose quickly and grabbed her staff, its tip imbued with protective light. The spirits whispered urgently in her ear, "She's here, Zora. Protect the talisman." Zora hurried toward the throne room, where she sensed the disturbance. There, in the dim light, stood a hooded figure cloaked in darkness. It was one of Osha's minions, a shadow walker sent to retrieve the talisman. "You will not take this," Zora said firmly, her voice echoing in the vast room. The figure hissed, lunging at her with unnatural speed. But Zora was ready. She raised her staff, summoning a barrier of light. The shadow walker recoiled, screeching as the light burned its form. Before it could retreat, Zora chanted an incantation, binding the shadow in place. "Why does she want the talisman so desperately?" she demanded. The shadow struggled against the bindings, its voice a distorted whisper. "Without it, you are powerless. With it, she will become unstoppable." Zora's grip on the staff tightened. "You will tell her this. I will never surrender. Let her come for me herself." With a final chant, she banished the shadow, its form disintegrating into the air. Exhausted but resolute, Zora returned to her chambers. She knew this was only the beginning of Osha's attempts to claim the talisman, but her resolve had never been stronger. Meanwhile, Kalu was growing restless. The defense plans were solid, the warriors prepared, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they needed more than strength to defeat Osha. As dawn broke, he sought out Queen Nila for counsel. "What would you do if you were in my position?" Kalu asked as they walked along the palace walls. Queen Nila regarded him thoughtfully. "In battle, the mind is just as important as the sword. Osha thrives on fear. If you want to defeat her, you must strike where she least expects it." Kalu nodded, her words sparking an idea. That evening, he called a secret meeting with a handful of trusted warriors. "We're going to infiltrate her stronghold," he said. "If we can weaken her forces from within, it will give us the upper hand." The plan was risky, but the warriors agreed. By nightfall, they were ready to move. Kalu left a message for Zora, explaining his absence and asking her to trust him. As the small group ventured into the forest, Kalu's thoughts were on Zora. He knew she wouldn't approve of his dangerous plan, but he also knew it was their best chance to turn the tide. Kalu and his small team of warriors moved silently through the Forest of Whispers, the most treacherous path to Osha's stronghold. The forest was alive with eerie sounds. Trees creaked without wind, unseen creatures rustled in the underbrush, and faint voices called out from the shadows. "Stay close," Kalu whispered. His voice was steady, but his grip on his sword tightened. The warriors nodded, their expressions grim but determined. As they ventured deeper, the voices grew louder. One of the warriors, Ikeen, suddenly stopped, his eyes wide. "My mother's voice. She's calling me," he murmured, stepping toward the darkness. "No," Kalu barked, grabbing Ikeen's arm. "It's a trick. The forest preys on your fears and desires. Focus." Ikeen hesitated, then nodded, shaking off the spell. But the incident served as a reminder. They were in Osha's domain now, where nothing was as it seemed. Hours later, they reached a clearing where the forest thinned. Before them loomed Osha's stronghold, a towering structure shrouded in a dark mist. Kalu signaled for the group to stop. "This is it," he said. "We'll wait until nightfall to make our move." As they set up a quiet camp, Kalu's mind wandered to Zora. He hoped she would understand his decision and that she was safe. Little did he know, Zora was already sensing his absence and preparing to act. Zora sat cross-legged in her chamber, the talisman warm against her chest. She had tried to focus on fortifying the kingdom's defenses, but an uneasy feeling gnawed at her. Kalu's absence was not ordinary. She knew him too well. Closing her eyes, she called upon the spirits for guidance. The room grew still, and a vision unfolded before her. She saw Kalu and his warriors moving through a dark forest, their faces determined but wary. She recognized the Forest of Whispers immediately. The vision shifted, showing Kalu entering a fortress cloaked in shadows. Inside, Osha waited, her cruel smile radiating malice. Zora's heart clenched as she saw chains of dark magic wrapping around Kalu. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Zora gasping. "He's walking into a trap," she murmured. Without hesitation, Zora summoned Queen Nila and her trusted advisors. "Kalu has gone to Osha's stronghold," she said urgently. "I've seen it. He and his warriors are in grave danger. We must act quickly." Queen Nila placed a steadying hand on Zora's shoulder. "We'll gather our forces, but rushing into her domain unprepared could cost us dearly." Zora nodded, her mind racing. "Then I'll go ahead. Alone. I can use my magic to protect myself and find Kalu. You follow with reinforcements." Though Nila protested, Zora was resolute. The bond between her and Kalu was too strong to ignore. She would not let him face the darkness alone. Zora prepared for her journey with quiet determination. She packed a satchel with herbs, her talisman, and her staff. Before leaving, she visited the palace courtyard, where the sacred baobab tree stood tall. She placed a hand on its rough bark, seeking strength from the ancient spirits. "Watch over the kingdom while I'm gone," she whispered, her voice laced with urgency. The tree's leaves rustled as though in reply, a gentle reminder that her connection to nature was always with her. Under the cover of night, Zora slipped past the palace gates and into the wilds. The journey to the Forest of Whispers was treacherous, but Zora moved swiftly, guided by her instincts and the whispers of the spirits. She could feel the forest's dark energy long before she arrived. At the forest's edge, she paused, clutching her talisman. "I need you now more than ever," she murmured, stepping into the shadows. The air grew colder, and the whispers began almost immediately. "Zora, turn back," the voices pleaded, but she pressed on. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches like skeletal fingers. But Zora's heart was focused on one thing: saving Kalu. Inside Osha's stronghold, Kalu and his warriors found themselves overwhelmed. They had barely stepped into the fortress when the ground beneath them shifted, and dark tendrils of magic erupted from the floor, binding their arms and legs. "Did you truly think you could outsmart me?" Osha's voice echoed through the hole as she appeared before them, her figure draped in flowing black robes. Her eyes glowed with malice, and her smile was sharp enough to cut. Kalu struggled against the magical binds, his muscles straining. "Your reign of fear will end, Osha. The people won't bow to you." She laughed, a sound that sent chills through the room. "Oh, brave little prince. It's not their loyalty I seek. It's power. And once I have the talisman, even your precious Zora won't stand a chance." Kalu's heart sank at the mention of Zora. He could only pray that she was safe and far from this place. But his worst fears were realized when Osha turned her gaze toward the fortress gates. "She's coming," Osha purred, her smile widening. "And when she arrives, I'll take everything from her. Her magic, her talisman, and her life." Kalu clenched his fists, fury burning in his veins. "You underestimate her. She's stronger than you know." "We'll see," Osha replied, waving her hand dismissively. The tendrils tightened around Kalu and his warriors, pulling them deeper into the fortress. As Zora ventured deeper into the Forest of Whispers, the trees seemed to come alive, their branches twisting unnaturally. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, but she pressed on, clutching her staff for strength. Suddenly, the ground beneath her shifted, and she stumbled into a clearing. Standing before her was an ethereal figure, a woman cloaked in leaves and vines, her eyes glowing like fireflies. "Zora," the figure said, her voice echoing like a melody. "You seek to enter the domain of great darkness. But first, you must prove yourself worthy." Zora straightened, her heart steady. "I have no time for tests. Kalu and my people are in danger." The figure raised a hand, and vines shot out from the ground, wrapping around Zora's ankles. "If you cannot face your own fears, how will you face hers?" Before Zora could respond, the clearing transformed. She was no longer in the forest, but standing in the ruins of Sozuri. The palace was in flames, and voices screamed out for help. "Zora," a voice called. She turned to see her younger sister, Amoka, trapped beneath a fallen beam. "Help me." Zora's heart shattered. She raced toward her sister, her hands trembling as she tried to lift the beam. But no matter how hard she tried, it wouldn't budge. "Why did you leave us?" Amoka sobbed, her voice echoing in Zora's mind. Zora froze, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't. I would never." Suddenly, the vision shattered, and she was back in the clearing. The ethereal figure watched her with a solemn expression. "You carry the weight of many healers. But remember, guilt is a chain. Only when you free yourself can you truly save others." Zora took a deep breath, the vines releasing her as she stood tall. "I will not fail. Show me the way." The figure nodded, fading into the trees. A path opened before Zora, leading her closer to Osha's stronghold. Deep within the fortress, Kalu was dragged into a dimly lit chamber. The walls pulsed with dark magic, and Osha stood at the center, her hands outstretched as she conjured a swirling orb of energy. "You'll watch as your kingdom falls," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "And when your beloved Zora arrives, she'll meet the same fate." Kalu gritted his teeth, his muscles straining against the magical binds. "You underestimate us, Osha. Zora's strength isn't just in her magic, it's in her heart." Osha's laughter echoed through the chamber. "How quaint. Love is nothing but a weakness, a distraction. And soon, it will be your undoing." As she turned her attention to the orb, Kalu began working on the ropes binding his wrists. He'd been trained to escape even the tightest of holds, and though the magic made it harder, he refused to give up. One of the warriors caught his eye and subtly nodded, signaling that he too was working on his bonds. Kalu's heart swelled with pride. Even in the face of despair, his men were resilient. As the ropes loosened, Kalu whispered under his breath, "Hold on, Zora. I'm fighting for you too." Zora reached the edge of the forest of whispers just as the first light of dawn broke through the horizon. Ahead of her loomed Osha's stronghold, a towering fortress enshrouded in dark mist. The talisman around her neck pulsed faintly, as though warning her of the evil within. "Stay strong," she whispered to herself. She pressed her palm against the earth, connecting with the spirits of the land. "Guide me." The ground responded, revealing faint trails of light leading toward the fortress gates. But as she approached, she felt the presence of dark energy. Osha's defenses were strong. The gates themselves were alive with enchantments, their iron surface shimmering ominously. Zora closed her eyes and murmured an incantation. Her staff glowed brightly, and the light began to pierce through the mist. But just as she was about to step forward, shadowy figures emerged from the ground. Osha's sentinels, spectral warriors bound to her will. "You cannot pass," one of them hissed, their voices blending like the howl of the wind. Zora raised her staff. "I come in peace, but I will not be stopped." The sentinels lunged, their ethereal blades slicing through the air. Zora moved with precision, her staff spinning in defense as she chanted protective spells. The spirits of nature answered her call, vines shooting from the ground to bind the sentinels. The battle was fierce but swift, and when the last sentinel fell, the gates creaked open slightly, as if inviting her in. Zora hesitated, gripping her talisman. "Kalu," she whispered. "I'm coming." Inside the fortress, Kalu's efforts to free himself finally bore fruit. With a sharp twist, he broke free of the magical binds holding his wrists. His movements were swift as he silently motioned to his men, who had also managed to loosen their restraints. "Be ready," he whispered. "We don't have much time." The warriors nodded, their eyes fierce. Kalu scanned the chamber, noting the guards stationed at the entrance. He signaled to one of his men, who discreetly slid a hidden blade from his boot. In unison, they launched their attack. The guards, caught off guard by the sudden rebellion, fell quickly. Kalu led his men through the winding corridors of the fortress, navigating the maze-like structure with sharp focus. But as they turned a corner, they were met with a towering figure cloaked in shadows. It was one of Osha's most loyal enforcers, a beast of a man with glowing red eyes and a massive battle axe. "You think you can escape?" the enforcer growled, his voice rumbling like thunder. Kalu stood his ground, drawing his sword. "We don't need to escape. We need to defeat you." The clash was brutal, the enforcer's strength nearly overwhelming. But Kalu's leadership and the determination of his men turned the tide. Together, they managed to overpower the enforcer, though not without injury. As they caught their breath, Kalu felt a strange warmth in the air. He turned, his heart racing. Somewhere in the fortress, he could feel Zora's presence. "She's here," he murmured, a mixture of relief and fear flooding his chest. The heavy gates groaned open as Zora stepped into the fortress. Inside, the air was thick with an unnatural cold that sent shivers down her spine. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, covered in strange runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. Zora's footsteps echoed as she moved cautiously through the long corridors. She gripped her staff tightly, her senses on high alert. Whispers followed her, disembodied voices murmuring unintelligibly. "Show yourself, Osha," Zora called out, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. "I've come for Kalu and my people. Your tyranny ends now." Her words were met with silence, but the whispers grew louder. Suddenly, a door at the end of the corridor creaked open, revealing a staircase spiraling downward. Zora hesitated, then followed the path, each step feeling heavier than the last. At the bottom of the staircase, she entered a massive chamber lit by an eerie green glow. There, in the center, stood Osha, her dark robes billowing as though caught in an invisible wind. "You're bold to come here alone," Osha sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. "Did you think your little spells would protect you from me?" Zora raised her staff, her eyes blazing with determination. "I don't need to defeat you alone. The spirits of this land stand with me." and your darkness cannot overpower their light. Osha laughed, a cold, chilling sound. Then let's see how strong your light truly is. Kalu and his warriors pushed forward, fighting their way through the labyrinthine corridors. The fortress seemed to shift and change, as though it were alive and working against them. Despite the injuries they'd sustained, the group moved with purpose, determined to find their way out, or to find Zora. As they turned another corner, Kalu froze. His heart skipped a beat as he saw her, Zora, standing in the chamber below, face to face with Osha. "She's here," he whispered, his voice filled with a mix of relief and dread. He motioned for his men to stay back. "I need to reach her." Kalu descended the stairs quietly, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. But as he approached, Osha's head snapped toward him, her eyes gleaming with cruel delight. "Ah, the prince," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "How sweet of you to join us. Now I can destroy you both together." Zora turned, her breath catching at the sight of Kalu. Relief and fear flashed across her face. "Kalu, no. You shouldn't be here." "I couldn't let you face this alone," he replied, stepping beside her. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, the chaos around them faded. Osha raised her hands, and the chamber trembled. "Enough of this," she roared. "Let's see how strong your bond truly is." Dark tendrils of magic shot toward them, but Zora and Kalu stood their ground. Together, they prepared to face the battle of their lives. Zora and Kalu stood side by side, their resolve unshaken despite the dark tendrils of magic surging toward them. Zora raised her staff, chanting an incantation that summoned a shield of light. The tendrils struck the barrier with ferocity, sending sparks flying. "Stay close to me," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I don't plan on leaving your side," Kalu replied, unsheathing his sword. Its blade gleamed, reflecting the light of Zora's magic. Osha smirked from across the chamber, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air as she conjured another wave of energy. "You think your little tricks can save you? I'll crush your bond and your spirits in one blow." The room trembled as Osha unleashed a storm of dark energy. Zora's shield wavered under the onslaught, but she poured her strength into holding it steady. Meanwhile, Kalu darted forward, his sword slicing through the shadows that tried to block his path. "Zora now!" Kalu shouted. With a powerful cry, Zora shattered her shield, directing its fragments of light toward Osha. The shards pierced through the dark magic, forcing the sorceress to stumble back. "You'll pay for that," Osha roared, her eyes blazing. She unleashed a pulse of energy that sent both Zora and Kalu sprawling across the chamber floor. Zora groaned, struggling to her feet. She clutched her talisman, its warmth giving her renewed strength. "Kalu, we can't stop now. We're stronger together." He nodded, his determination unwavering. "Then let's end this." As Osha prepared another attack, Zora and Kalu exchanged a glance, their unspoken bond stronger than ever. Zora raised her staff, and Kalu placed his hand over hers. Together, their energies merged, creating a radiant force that filled the chamber with blinding light. What is this?" Osha hissed, shielding her eyes. "It's the power you'll never understand," Zora said, her voice ringing with authority. "The power of unity, love, and light." The radiant energy surged forward, overwhelming Osha's dark magic. She screamed as the light consumed her, shattering the shadows that had cloaked her for so long. The fortress trembled violently, the dark runes on the walls fading into nothingness. The chamber began to collapse as Osha's power disintegrated. Kalu grabbed Zora's hand. "We have to get out of here." The two of them ran, navigating the crumbling corridors with urgency. Along the way, they found Kalu's warriors, who had been battling remnants of Osha's forces. Together, they made their way toward the exit as the fortress fell apart around them. When they finally emerged into the open air, the dawn greeted them with warmth and light. Zora looked back at the collapsing fortress, a sense of relief washing over her. "It's over," she said softly. Kalu took her hand, his grip firm. "Thanks to you." But Zora's eyes flickered with caution. "Not yet. Darkness like hers doesn't vanish so easily. We'll need to remain vigilant." Kalu nodded, his admiration for her growing even deeper. "Then we'll face whatever comes next, together." As the sun rose higher, Its golden rays seemed to cleanse the land of the lingering shadows. Zora and Kalu led the warriors back to Sozuri, their hearts heavy with exhaustion but lightened by the taste of victory. When they reached the edge of the village, the people were already gathered, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. A young boy was the first to spot them. "They've returned," he shouted, his voice ringing with joy. The villagers erupted in cheers, rushing toward their rescuers. Kalu's warriors were embraced as heroes, and Zora was surrounded by children offering garlands of flowers. Zora's father, King Diallo, stepped forward, his regal bearing softened by relief. He opened his arms to her. "My daughter, you've brought light back to our land." Zora hugged him tightly, her strength momentarily giving way to the comfort of her father's embrace. "It was not just me, Papa. We all stood together." Kalu approached, bowing respectfully to the king. "Your Majesty, it is an honor to serve beside Zora. She is remarkable." King Diallo looked between them, a knowing smile on his face. "You both have shown courage beyond measure. Our village owes you its life." But as the celebrations began, Zora's expression grew somber. She felt a faint, unsettling energy on the wind, like the remnants of Osha's magic clinging to the earth. She whispered to Kalu, "This peace may not last." "I can feel it." He nodded, his hand brushing hers in reassurance. "Then we'll be ready for whatever comes next." The celebrations in Sozuri continued late into the evening. Fires were lit, music filled the air, and laughter replaced the fear that had long gripped the village. Yet Zora's heart remained uneasy. As she walked through the lively crowd, her talisman began to pulse faintly against her chest. The rhythmic warmth felt like a warning, urging her to be vigilant. She moved toward the edge of the gathering, where the forest loomed dark and quiet. Kalu found her there, standing beneath a tree with her staff in hand. "You're worried," he said softly, stepping beside her. Zora nodded. "The air feels strange. I thought Osha's defeat would bring peace, but something isn't right." Before Kalu could respond, a sudden gust of wind tore through the village, extinguishing the fires and plunging the celebration into darkness. The music stopped abruptly, replaced by the frightened murmurs of the villagers. "What's happening?" someone cried. Zora's talisman glowed brightly, its light illuminating the area. She gripped her staff and turned toward Kalu. "This isn't over." From the forest, an eerie howl echoed, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Many footsteps. Shadows began to emerge from the trees, figures cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing with malevolence. Kalu drew his sword, his voice firm as he called to the villagers. "Everyone get to safety. Warriors to me." Zora stepped forward, her voice calm but commanding. "These creatures are bound to Osha's magic. They are here for revenge." The first of the shadowy figures lunged toward her, and she raised her staff, unleashing a burst of light that sent it sprawling. "We will protect our home," she said, her voice steady. "No matter what." Zora's light shone brightly, casting the shadowy figures into sharp relief. They were monstrous, hulking shapes with clawed hands and glowing red eyes, their forms flickering as though they weren't fully of this world. The villagers, huddled together in fear, watched as the warriors joined Zora and Kalu at the front line. Kalu swung his sword, his movements precise and powerful. He cut through the first wave of creatures, their forms dissipating into dark mist. "Stay close, Zora," he shouted over the chaos. Zora spun her staff in a graceful arc, creating a protective barrier around the warriors. "These creatures are drawn to fear and chaos," she called out. "Hold your ground, and they will weaken." The warriors fought bravely, their weapons clashing against the creatures' claws. But for every shadow they defeated, more seemed to rise from the forest. The air grew thick with darkness, and even Zora's light began to flicker under the strain. "We can't keep this up forever," Kalu said, panting as he struck down another shadow. "There's too many of them." Zora's mind raced. She gripped her talisman, feeling its warmth pulse against her skin. Suddenly, an idea came to her, a way to disrupt the creature's connection to Osha's magic. "Kalu, I need time to perform a ritual," she said urgently. "Can you hold them off?" Kalu nodded, determination burning in his eyes. "Do what you need to. We'll protect you." Zora stepped back, kneeling on the ground. She placed her staff in front of her and closed her eyes, chanting softly. The earth beneath her began to glow, and a faint hum filled the air. As Zora continued her chant, the glow spread outward, forming intricate patterns on the ground. The creatures hesitated, sensing the shift in energy. Kalu and the warriors pressed their advantage, pushing the shadows back toward the forest. But the creatures weren't giving up easily. One of them broke through the line, lunging straight for Zora. Kalu saw it just in time. He sprinted toward her, his sword slicing through the air. The creature dissolved into mist mere inches from Zora's back. "Stay focused," Kalu said, his voice breathless but steady. "We've got you." Zora didn't open her eyes, her concentration unwavering. The patterns on the ground began to pulse in rhythm with her talisman, growing brighter with each passing second. The creatures screeched, their forms flickering as the light intensified. Suddenly, the ground beneath the forest erupted in a blinding flash. A wave of energy surged outward, sweeping through the battlefield and dissolving the shadowy figures. The villagers gasped as the darkness lifted, revealing a clear night sky filled with stars. Zora opened her eyes, her face pale but triumphant. She rose unsteadily, leaning on her staff. "It's done," she said softly. Kalu rushed to her side, his hand steadying her. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. The villagers emerged from their hiding places, their faces alight with gratitude and wonder. King Diallo stepped forward, his voice ringing with pride. "My daughter, you have saved us once again." But Zora's gaze lingered on the forest. Though the immediate danger had passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that their fight wasn't over. "Kalu," she said quietly, "there's more to this." "I can feel it." He nodded, his expression serious. "Then we'll face whatever comes, together." The village returned to life, but unease lingered in Zora's heart. She walked through the quiet fields at dawn, her staff tapping softly against the ground. The birds greeted her, chirping their morning songs, but their voices held an unusual urgency. "Danger still lurks," a small sparrow whispered, fluttering near her. "The forest is restless." The shadows were not the end. Zora paused, crouching to listen more closely. "What have you seen, little one?" "The trees speak of something deeper," the sparrow continued, its tiny chest puffing as it relayed the message. "An old power stirs beneath the earth, waiting, watching." Zora's grip tightened on her staff. She had sensed it too, a subtle, pulsing energy that seemed to hum just below the surface of the land. It wasn't Osha's magic, but something older, more dangerous. Kalu found her as the sun broke through the horizon. "Zora, you've been up all night," he said, concern etched across his face. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. "There's something else out there, Kalu. Something bigger than Osha. The land itself feels uneasy." Kalu's jaw tightened. "Then we'll prepare. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Zora smiled faintly, drawing strength from his resolve. "I'll speak with my father. The elders may know more about this ancient force." As they walked back to the village, neither of them noticed the faint glow deep within the forest, a golden light flickering beneath the soil, waiting to be unearthed. The council of elders gathered in the great hall, their expressions grave as Zora explained what she had sensed. The room was dimly lit, the flickering flames casting long shadows across the carved wooden walls. King Diallo sat at the head of the table, listening intently as Zora described the whispers of the birds and the uneasy energy that lingered in the air. When she finished, the elders exchanged worried glances. "It is as we feared," one of them said, his voice trembling with age. "The power beneath the earth, it has been dormant for centuries. But if the shadows have awakened it, we may be in grave danger." "What kind of power?" Kalu asked, leaning forward. The elder hesitated before answering. "Long ago, before our village was founded, there was a being known as Nakibo, the keeper of balance. It was neither good nor evil, but a force that punished those who upset the harmony of the land. If it has awakened, it will seek to restore balance, by any means necessary." Zora's heart sank. "And what can we do to stop it?" Another elder shook her head. "No one knows how to stop Nakibo. The stories say it can only be appeased, not defeated." King Diallo stood, his voice firm. "Then we must learn how to appease it. Zora, Kalu, you must uncover the truth behind this legend. Our people's lives depend on it." Zora and Kalu exchanged a determined glance. Together, they would face this new challenge, no matter how impossible it seemed. The elders directed Zora and Kalu to an ancient library hidden beneath the king's palace. The stone walls of the underground chamber were lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of dusty scrolls and books. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and earth. Zora's talisman glowed faintly as she entered, a sign that they were in the right place. "These scrolls must hold the secrets we're looking for," she said, running her fingers along the worn bindings. Kalu nodded, already pulling out a thick volume. "If Nakibo is as ancient as the elders say, its history should be recorded here." Hours passed as they sifted through the texts. Zora found tales of other villages that had been destroyed when the Keeper of Balance deemed them unworthy. Each story spoke of natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, and storms that had wiped out entire communities. "It doesn't attack directly," Zora murmured, her brow furrowed in thought. "It uses the elements to destroy." Kalu held up a fragile scroll. "Look at this." He unrolled it carefully, revealing a diagram of a glowing tree with roots that extended deep into the earth. "It says here that Nakibo's power is connected to something called the Tree of Origin. If we can find this tree, we might have a chance to reason with it, or at least understand it." Zora's eyes widened. "The Tree of Origin. I've heard the birds mention it before. It's said to lie in the heart of the Forbidden Forest." Kalu frowned. "The Forbidden Forest is dangerous. No one who enters it ever returns." Zora met his gaze, her resolve unwavering. "Then we'll be the first to return." Armed with the knowledge from the scrolls, Zora and Kalu prepared for their journey. The villagers watched anxiously as they set out, their path leading toward the edge of the Forbidden Forest. The forest loomed before them, its trees towering so high that they seemed to touch the sky. A thick mist curled around the trunks, and the air was eerily silent. Even the birds seemed reluctant to venture near. "Stay close," Zora whispered, clutching her staff. Her talisman glowed faintly, guiding their steps. Kalu walked beside her, his sword ready. "I've never seen a place so alive," he said, his voice low. The forest seemed to breathe around them, the leaves rustling without wind. As they ventured deeper, they encountered strange sights. Trees with glowing sap, flowers that hummed softly, and animals that seemed to watch them with unnerving intelligence. Zora paused near a stream, bending to touch the water. It was warm, almost unnaturally so. She closed her eyes, listening to its whispers. "The forest is alive," she said. "It knows we're here." Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A low growl echoed through the trees, and a massive figure stepped into view. It was a guardian of the forest, a creature made of wood and stone, its eyes glowing green. "Who dares enter this sacred place?" It rumbled, its voice deep and resonant. Zora stepped forward, her heart pounding. "We seek the Tree of Origin. Our village is in danger, and we need its guidance." The guardian studied them for a long moment before stepping aside. "If your intentions are pure, the tree will decide your fate. Proceed, but know that many have failed this journey." Kalu gripped Zora's hand as they walked past the guardian, their path now leading into the heart of the forest. As Zora and Kalu ventured deeper into the Forbidden Forest, the air grew heavier, filled with an ancient energy that seemed to press down on them. The trees whispered, their voices low and unintelligible, and the ground beneath their feet pulsed as though alive. "Be careful where you step," Zora said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her talisman glowed faintly, its light steady but cautious. Ahead of them, the path forked into 3 narrow trails, each one darker and more foreboding than the last. A faint golden light flickered at the end of the middle trail, but the other 2 seemed to hum with their own mysterious energy. "Which one do we take?" Kalu asked, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Zora closed her eyes, focusing on the whispers of the forest. The talisman around her neck grew warmer, and she felt a gentle tug toward the middle path. "This way," she said, her voice filled with certainty. As they walked, the trees seemed to close in around them, their branches forming an archway that blocked out the sky. The golden light grew brighter, and they found themselves standing before a massive stone door covered in ancient carvings. "What now?" Kalu asked, his brow furrowed. Zora examined the carvings, her fingers tracing the symbols. "It's a riddle," she murmured. "To open the door, We must prove our intentions are pure. A deep voice echoed from the stone. What will you sacrifice to restore balance? Zora hesitated, then stepped forward. My strength, she said. I will give everything I have to protect my people. Kalu followed, his voice steady. My life, if it means saving those I love. The carvings glowed, and the door slowly creaked open, revealing a shimmering path that led further into the forest. The shimmering path led them to a clearing where the tree of origin stood in all its glory. Its massive trunk glowed with a golden light, and its branches stretched impossibly high, bearing leaves that shimmered like jewels. The air around the tree was warm and filled with a soothing hum. But as they approached, 3 figures materialized from the light. They were humanoid but radiated an otherworldly presence. Their eyes glowed with the same golden hue as the tree, and their voices echoed in unison. You have come seeking the tree of origin. State your purpose. Zora stepped forward, her staff glowing faintly. We seek balance and guidance. Our land is threatened by an ancient power, and we need to know how to restore harmony. The guardians exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable. Balance comes at a cost, one of them said. To awaken the tree's power, you must prove your worth. Kalu tightened his grip on his sword. What do we need to do? The second guardian stepped forward. 3 trials await you. The first is the trial of courage, where you will face your greatest fears. The second is the trial of wisdom, where you must solve the riddle of the forest. The third is the trial of sacrifice, where you must give up something precious to you. Zora nodded, determination shining in her eyes. We will face whatever trials you set before us. The third guardian gestured toward the base of the tree, where a glowing doorway appeared. Enter, and your journey will begin. But be warned, few who undertake this path ever return. Zora and Kalu exchanged a determined glance, then stepped through the doorway, ready to face the trials ahead. The glowing doorway led Zora and Kalu into a dark cavern, its walls shimmering faintly as if lit by unseen stars. The air was cool and heavy, and their footsteps echoed ominously. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shifted, and they found themselves standing in separate circles of light. A voice echoed through the cavern. To pass the trial of courage, you must confront your deepest fears. There will be no escape until you face them. Zora felt the air around her grow cold. She turned, only to find herself standing in her village, but it was in ruins. The fields were scorched, the houses collapsed, and the air was filled with the cries of her people. Her father's voice called out to her, filled with anguish. Zora, you failed us. Her heart raced as the image of her father, broken and defeated, appeared before her. No, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. This isn't real. But the scene felt so vivid, so real, that doubt crept into her mind. She clutched her talisman, its warmth anchoring her. This is my fear, she said aloud, her voice trembling but firm. But fear cannot control me. I will fight to protect my people, no matter what. The vision dissolved, and Zora found herself back in the cavern. The light surrounding her grew brighter, a sign she had passed the trial. Meanwhile, Kalu stood frozen as his own fear materialized, a scene of betrayal. He saw his family turning against him, their voices accusing him of abandoning them. You were never worthy of our name, they shouted. Kalu's fists clenched, his heart aching at the sight. This isn't real, he growled. I've spent my life proving my worth, and I'll keep doing so. My strength isn't in their approval, it's in my actions. As he spoke, the vision faded, and the light around him intensified. Both he and Zora had passed the trial of courage. A second doorway appeared, leading them into a lush garden filled with plants and flowers of every color. In the center stood a massive stone pedestal with an inscription carved into its surface. To pass the trial of wisdom, the inscription read, "You must solve the riddle of the forest. Beware, every wrong answer carries a price." Kalu frowned. What kind of riddle? As if in answer, a disembodied voice spoke, "I am not alive, but I grow. I have no lungs, but I need air. What am I?" Zora thought for a moment, her mind racing. Not alive but grows. No lungs but needs air. She glanced around the garden, her eyes landing on a flickering flame atop a nearby torch. "Fire," she said confidently. The pedestal glowed, and the voice spoke again. Correct. Proceed to the next question. Kalu stepped forward, determination in his eyes. Ask me. The voice posed another riddle. I speak without a mouth and hear without ears. I have no body, but I come alive with the wind. What am I? Kalu furrowed his brow, thinking hard. He looked at the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. Then it came to him. An echo. The pedestal glowed once more. Correct. You may continue. A final riddle appeared, this one meant for both of them. The more of me you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? Zora and Kalu exchanged a glance, their minds working in tandem. Finally, Zora smiled. Footsteps. The pedestal lit up, and the garden transformed, revealing a new path forward. They had passed the trial of wisdom. The next doorway led Zora and Kalu into a vast open field bathed in a golden light. In the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a glowing crystal. The air was thick with an almost unbearable energy, as if the entire space was alive with anticipation. A voice, deep and resonant, filled the air. The trial of sacrifice demands a part of your essence. You must willingly give up something you hold dear to awaken the tree of origin. Kalu stepped forward, his jaw set. What kind of sacrifice? My sword, my wealth, my... The voice interrupted, not objects. What you sacrifice must come from within. Zora's breath caught. She placed a hand over her talisman, which pulsed gently. It's asking for more than we've ever given before, she whispered. Kalu turned to her, his expression grim. If it's for the village, I'll do it. He closed his eyes, summoning all his courage. Take my courage. If it means saving the people I love, I'll face the world with fear, as long as they live in peace. The golden crystal dimmed momentarily, but the voice did not declare the trial complete. Instead, it spoke again. Your offering is noble, but this trial is not for one alone. It requires both of you to give. Zora stepped forward, tears glistening in her eyes. She clutched her talisman, feeling its comforting warmth. I offer my connection to nature, she said, her voice trembling. Take the bond that lets me speak to animals, plants, and the world around me. If it saves my people, I will endure the silence. The crystal's light exploded, bathing the field in a radiant glow. The sacrifice was accepted. Zora felt her talisman grow cold, and a deep ache settled in her chest. Kalu, too, felt his heart quiver as fear whispered at the edges of his mind. But they stood firm, knowing they had passed the final trial. The golden light from the crystal flowed into the ground, spreading in ripples that reached the base of the tree of origin. The massive trunk began to glow, its leaves shimmering as if caught in an eternal sunrise. Zora and Kalu stood in awe as the tree began to hum, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo through their very souls. The air grew warm, and the whispers of the forest turned into a harmonious chorus. From the tree's base, a figure emerged, formed entirely of golden light. It had no distinct features, but its presence was both comforting and overwhelming. You have proven yourselves worthy, it said, its voice carrying the weight of eternity. Zora said, what must we do to save our village? The figure gestured toward the crystal, which now hovered between them. The keeper of balance is tied to the imbalance of your world. The greed, the betrayal, the broken promises, these have summoned its wrath. You must carry this crystal to its core and remind it of the harmony it was created to protect. Kalu nodded, determination etched on his face. We'll do it. The figure raised a hand, and the crystal floated into Kalu's grasp. But beware, it warned. The keeper will resist. Only together can you succeed. As the figure faded, the forest seemed to exhale, its energy renewed. Zora and Kalu turned toward the path ahead, the crystal glowing brightly in Kalu's hands. We've come this far, Zora said, her voice steady despite the ache of her loss. We'll finish this. Kalu gave her a small, encouraging smile. Together. The path before them led to a cavern carved into a mountainside. It pulsed with an eerie red glow, as if the mountain itself was alive and watching their every move. The air was suffocating, filled with the metallic tang of tension. This must be the keeper's domain, Kalu said, gripping the glowing crystal tightly. Zora nodded, her steps cautious. Her talisman was silent now, a constant reminder of what she had given up. She felt disconnected from the whispers of the earth, but she pressed on, relying on her inner strength. As they entered the cavern, the walls seemed to close in around them. Shadows danced and twisted, forming shapes that whispered threats in voices too faint to fully hear. At the center of the cavern, a massive figure loomed, a creature of shadow and flame. Its eyes burned with fury, and its voice rumbled like thunder. "You dare to disturb me," the keeper growled, its form shifting between solid and smoke. "Your kind has forgotten balance, and I will see it restored through destruction." Kalu stepped forward, holding the crystal high. "We haven't come to fight but to remind you of your purpose, to protect, not destroy." The keeper roared, its flames flaring. "Words mean nothing. Prove your resolve." The cavern shook as the keeper attacked, sending waves of energy rippling through the air. Kalu and Zora dove to opposite sides, narrowly avoiding the onslaught. Zora's mind raced. Without her connection to nature, she couldn't rely on the usual help of the elements or animals. "We have to reach its core," she shouted to Kalu. Kalu nodded, his sword drawn. "Cover me." He charged forward, the crystal in one hand and his blade in the other. The keeper's attacks grew more violent, its flames licking at the walls of the cavern. Zora used what little magic she had left, creating shields of light to deflect the worst of the blasts. "Kalu, hurry," she yelled, her energy waning. Kalu dodged another wave of fire, his focus unwavering. He could feel the crystal pulsing in his hand, as though it was guiding him. "Just a little closer," he muttered. The keeper roared, slamming a massive fist into the ground. The impact sent shockwaves through the cavern, and Kalu was thrown off balance. The crystal slipped from his hand, rolling toward the edge of a dark chasm. "No!" Zora cried. She sprinted toward the crystal, diving just in time to grab it before it fell. But as she stood, the keeper loomed over her, its eyes blazing with rage. "You think you can stop me?" it bellowed. Zora held the crystal high, her voice steady despite her fear. "We don't want to stop you, we want to remind you. Your purpose is not to destroy but to preserve." The keeper hesitated, its flames flickering. For a moment, its form wavered, as if unsure. Kalu seized the opportunity, leaping forward to stand beside Zora. "Together," he said, placing a hand over hers on the crystal. The crystal's light exploded, bathing the cavern in a radiant glow that pushed back the keeper's flames. The air grew still, and the keeper's form began to shrink, its anger replaced by something softer. "Balance," it murmured, its voice calmer now. "You have reminded me." As the light from the crystal enveloped the cavern, the keeper's form solidified into something less menacing. No longer a towering figure of flame and shadow, it now resembled an elder with glowing eyes and an air of wisdom. "You have risked everything to stand before me," the keeper said, its voice resonating through the cavern. "Why should I trust that humanity will honor the balance you seek to restore?" Zora stepped forward, holding the crystal tightly. Her voice was steady, but her heart ached. "Because we have already sacrificed what is dearest to us for this chance. We are not just here for ourselves. We're here for the people, the animals, the land, everything that depends on balance to survive." Kalu added, "The greed and betrayal of a few should not condemn the many. If you destroy everything, there will be nothing left to rebuild. Let us prove that harmony can be achieved." The keeper regarded them silently for a moment, the cavern filled with an expectant hush. Finally, it raised its hands, and the ground beneath them began to glow. "Then I will test your sincerity one last time," it said. The earth shifted, and vines burst from the ground, wrapping around Zora and Kalu. They were lifted into the air, their bodies suspended as the keeper examined their hearts. Zora felt an intense pressure in her chest, as though every choice she had ever made was being judged. "You carry truth and sacrifice," the keeper said, addressing Zora. It turned to Kalu. "And you, bravery and resolve. Together, you are strong, but will you remain so when faced with ultimate loss?" The keeper released them, and the cavern transformed into a vision of their village. But this was not the peaceful place they had fought to protect. It was a war-torn version, its people in despair, the fields barren. "This is what could come to pass," the keeper said, its voice echoing with finality. "To ensure balance, one of you must stay here with me, bound to the crystal for eternity. The other may return to the world and restore what has been broken." Zora and Kalu exchanged stunned glances. "No," Zora said immediately. "There has to be another way." "There is none," the keeper replied. "Balance requires sacrifice. Decide, or I will choose for you." Kalu's jaw tightened. "I'll stay," he said firmly. "You've already lost so much, Zora. The village needs your kindness, your wisdom, your healing touch. I've lived a life of privilege. This is my chance to truly give back." Zora's heart ached at his words. "No, Kalu. You're their protector. You've shown bravery and strength that inspire others to follow you. Without you, the village will be defenseless." The keeper watched silently as the two argued, its eyes glowing with an unreadable emotion. Finally, it raised a hand to silence them. "Your willingness to sacrifice yourselves is admirable. But the balance must still be preserved. Choose, or let the crystal decide." Zora took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "We'll find another way," she said, her eyes meeting Kalu's. Together, she turned back to the keeper. "If balance truly matters, then you must understand that separating us will weaken the very harmony we seek to restore." Kalu stepped beside her, his expression fierce. "We are stronger as one. If you demand a sacrifice, take something else. Our connection, our abilities, but let us stay together." The keeper paused, its form flickering as if conflicted. Finally, it nodded. "Very well. Together you shall face the future, and bear its burdens as one." As the keeper lowered its glowing hands, the vision of the village faded, leaving the cavern quiet once more. The air was no longer oppressive but carried a subtle warmth, as if hope had begun to bloom. "You have proven that unity, sacrifice, and resolve are the true elements of balance," the keeper said. Its voice had softened, carrying a tone of respect. "For that, I will grant you a gift to aid your journey and your people." Zora felt a pulse in her talisman, though it remained cold in her hands. Kalu held the crystal, now brighter than ever, its light reflecting his unwavering spirit. The keeper raised its arms, and a shimmering branch grew from the ceiling of the cavern, blossoming into a single golden fruit. It floated gently toward them. "This fruit holds the essence of renewal," the keeper explained. "Plant its seeds in the heart of your village, and it will restore life to the land. But beware, the fruit's power is not eternal. It requires care, honesty, and harmony to flourish." Kalu nodded, cradling the fruit as though it were a precious treasure. "We will honor this gift and protect its legacy." Zora stepped forward, her gaze steady. "And we will remind the people that balance is not a gift to be taken lightly, but a responsibility we all share." The keeper smiled, a flicker of light in the shadow of its form. "Go now. Your journey has not ended, but your hearts are ready." With those words, the cavern trembled, and a path of golden light opened before them. Zora and Kalu stepped forward, holding the fruit and crystal as the keeper's domain faded into memory. The journey back to the village was quiet but filled with an unspoken bond between Zora and Kalu. The land around them seemed to sense their victory, the skies clearing and the forest whispering in approval. When they arrived, the villagers were waiting, their faces etched with worry and hope. Zora stepped forward, her voice carrying the strength of their journey. "We have returned with the key to restoring balance." She held up the golden fruit, and the villagers gasped, murmuring among themselves. Kalu raised the crystal high, its glow illuminating the crowd. "This is a symbol of the sacrifices we made and the unity we must now uphold. Together, we can rebuild." The village elder stepped forward, his eyes brimming with tears. "You have done what no one else dared. You have given us hope." Zora knelt, placing the fruit at the heart of the village. With a steady hand, she split it open, revealing seeds that shimmered like stars. The villagers gathered around as she planted the seeds, their hands joining hers in the soil. The ground trembled, and from the spot where the seeds were planted, a sapling burst forth, glowing with life. Its branches stretched toward the sky, and the air filled with the scent of renewal. The villagers cheered, their joy filling the air. But Zora and Kalu exchanged a glance, knowing their work was not yet done. The balance was restored, but it would take vigilance and unity to keep it that way. In the days that followed, the golden sapling grew rapidly, its luminous branches spreading over the village like a protective canopy. The once scorched earth softened, and green shoots began to sprout in the fields. Streams that had dried up trickled once more, their waters clear and pure. Zora and Kalu worked tirelessly, helping the villagers rebuild their homes and teaching them the lessons they had learned on their journey. Zora showed them how to use herbs to heal both the land and their spirits, while Kalu trained the young warriors to defend their home without resorting to needless violence. But even as hope flourished, Zora began to feel a strange unease. The sapling, though beautiful, seemed to pulse with a rhythm that only she could feel, a rhythm that reminded her of the keeper's warning. Balance required care, honesty, and harmony. Was the village truly ready to uphold these values? One evening, as Zora sat beneath the sapling, the wind carried a faint whisper to her ears. "Watch the roots," it said. She looked down to see the sapling's roots twisting in the soil, reaching deeper than they should. The sight unsettled her, but before she could speak to anyone, the villagers approached with gifts of gratitude. "Zora," the elder said, bowing low, "you and Kalu have brought life back to our home. We owe you everything." Zora forced a smile, tucking away her unease. "The balance is a gift for all of us to protect. Let us never forget that." The village's joy began to waver as disagreements surfaced. Some villagers argued over the best way to distribute the renewed resources, while others questioned the growing influence of the golden sapling. "Why should one tree hold such power over our lives?" a skeptical farmer grumbled. Zora and Kalu worked to mediate, but the fractures in unity grew. One night, Kalu returned from a meeting with the village warriors, his face lined with frustration. "They're arguing over who should guard the sapling," he said, dropping into a seat beside Zora. Zora sighed. This is what the keeper feared. Balance isn't just about the land, it's about the people, too. If they can't learn to work together, she trailed off, her thoughts heavy. That night, Zora dreamed of the sapling again. In her vision, its roots stretched far beyond the village, wrapping around distant lands and drawing life from them. But instead of harmony, the sapling's expansion brought strife, its branches darkening as it consumed everything in its path. She woke with a start, her heart pounding. "Kalu," she whispered, shaking him awake. "Something's wrong. The sapling, it's growing too fast. It's taking too much." Kalu sat up, his eyes narrowing. "We need to act before it's too late." But as they prepared to address the village, a deep crack sounded from the heart of the tree, echoing through the night like a warning. At dawn, the villagers gathered around the golden sapling, their faces filled with worry as the crack in its trunk grew larger. The radiant glow that once emanated from the tree had dimmed, and its leaves shivered despite the still air. "What is happening?" one of the elders asked, his voice quivering. "This tree was supposed to save us, not frighten us." Zora stepped forward, her calm demeanor masking the storm inside her. "The sapling's power comes with a price. Balance demands vigilance and care. We may have overlooked something in our haste to rebuild." The crowd erupted in murmurs, their voices heavy with fear and doubt. Kalu raised his hand to silence them. "We cannot let fear divide us. This tree reflects our unity. If it falters, it means we are faltering too." Zora knelt before the sapling, placing her hands on its bark. Closing her eyes, she reached out with her powers, listening to the whispers of the roots. Images flooded her mind, arguments between villagers, greed creeping into decisions, and a growing shadow beneath the earth. When she opened her eyes, she stood, her voice firm. "The sapling is reacting to our discord. If we continue down this path of selfishness and division, it will consume not only itself but all of us." A voice from the crowd shouted, "How do we stop it?" Zora looked to Kalu, then back to the villagers. "We must come together again. Share openly, give selflessly, and protect the balance with every choice we make." The villagers nodded hesitantly, but Zora could feel the tension in the air. The path ahead would not be easy. That night, Zora and Kalu returned to the sapling. Zora brought her herbs and whispered an incantation, illuminating the ground beneath the tree. The soil glowed faintly, revealing a network of roots stretching far and wide. But something was wrong. Dark tendrils coiled among the roots, pulsing with an unnatural energy. "This isn't just about the villagers," Zora said, her voice trembling. "Something else is feeding on the sapling." Kalu drew his sword, his face grim. "Then we need to find out what it is." They followed the glowing roots into the forest, where the air grew colder and the ground harder with each step. Finally, they came to a clearing where the roots converged around a dark, gnarled tree. Its bark was twisted, and its leaves dripped with a black, tar-like substance. "This is the source," Zora whispered. As they approached, the tree groaned, and its branches moved like arms, lashing out toward them. Kalu leaped forward, cutting through the branches with swift, precise strikes, while Zora chanted a protective spell. The tree shrieked, and a shadowy figure emerged from its trunk. "You dare disturb me?" it hissed, its voice echoing with malice. Zora stood firm, her eyes blazing. "You're poisoning the balance. Who are you, and why are you doing this?" The figure laughed, its form shifting like smoke. "I am what remains of those who sought power without regard for harmony. I was cast away, and now I take my revenge by feeding on your precious balance." Kalu stepped forward, his sword gleaming. "Not anymore." The shadowy figure's laughter echoed across the clearing, chilling the air. As Kalu charged, sword raised, the figure dissolved into smoke, swirling around him. "You cannot fight what you cannot see," it taunted, reforming behind him. Zora, sensing the entity's movements, raised her hands and began chanting an ancient incantation. Her words drew power from the surrounding forest, and the trees and plants responded, their roots snaking toward the dark figure. The roots glowed faintly, trapping the shadow momentarily. But the figure wasn't easily subdued. It burst free, sending shards of dark energy hurtling toward Zora. She countered with a barrier of light, the force of their collision lighting up the clearing. "You're wrong to think darkness can consume everything," Zora said, her voice steady. "The balance is stronger than you." Kalu seized the opportunity, lunging forward with his sword. His blade sliced through the figure, and for a moment, the darkness recoiled. The shadow writhed and screamed, but instead of vanishing, it split into smaller forms that surrounded them. "Zora!" Kalu shouted, slashing at the dark forms. "I need more time," she replied, pouring her energy into a spell. Her voice rose, calling on the keeper's gift. The talisman around her neck began to glow, and its light spread outward, weakening the shadows. The figures screamed, their forms flickering and dissolving into mist. But before the last one disappeared, it hissed, "You cannot destroy me completely. I will always return where greed and discord reign." As silence fell over the clearing, Zora collapsed to her knees, exhausted. Kalu rushed to her side, steadying her. "We won, for now," he said. Zora nodded, though her heart was heavy. "The fight isn't over. The balance will always be vulnerable to those who seek to exploit it." Back in the village, the golden sapling began to glow brighter, its leaves regaining their luster. The villagers gathered around, marveling at the renewed vitality. But Zora and Kalu knew the threat wasn't gone. Zora addressed the crowd, her voice firm but kind. "The shadow we fought tonight feeds on greed, discord, and imbalance. It's a reminder that the true danger isn't always outside, it's within us." Kalu added, "The sapling's survival depends on our ability to remain united. This isn't just about a tree, it's about who we choose to be as a community." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances, but many nodded in agreement. The elder stepped forward, placing his hand on Zora's shoulder. "We will do our best to honor the balance. But we will need your guidance." Zora smiled, though her exhaustion showed. "We're all responsible for the balance. Kalu and I will stand by you, but each of you must stand by each other." That night, as the village settled into an uneasy peace, Zora couldn't sleep. She wandered to the edge of the forest, where she found Kalu keeping watch. "You feel it too," he said without looking at her. Zora nodded. "The shadow isn't gone. It's weakened, but it will return if we're not careful." Kalu sighed, his gaze on the horizon. "Then we'll be ready. Together." Zora smiled softly, her heart lightening despite the challenges ahead. For now, the village was safe, and that was enough. Weeks passed, and the village seemed to flourish once more. The golden sapling grew taller, its branches extending like protective arms over the land. Crops thrived, animals returned to the forests, and the villagers began to rebuild with a renewed sense of hope. But Zora couldn't shake the unease that lingered in her heart. Each night, as she meditated near the sapling, she felt faint whispers in the wind. "Balance is fragile," the voices warned. "Guard it or lose it." One evening, as Zora prepared a healing potion for an injured farmer, a young girl approached her, clutching a small, withered plant. "Zora," she said, her eyes wide with fear. "This plant came from the forest. It used to bloom, but now it's dying." Zora took the plant in her hands, her fingers brushing over its brittle leaves. She reached out with her powers, but the plant's energy felt faint, as though something had drained it. "Where did you find this?" she asked gently. "In the northern woods," the girl replied. "Near the old riverbed." Zora's heart sank. The northern woods had been untouched by the sapling's light, a place where darkness still lingered. She called for Kalu, who was training the young warriors. When he arrived, she showed him the withered plant. "We need to investigate," she said. "If the shadow is returning, we can't ignore it." Kalu nodded, his expression grim. "Then let's go. We'll need to move before it spreads further." Zora and Kalu ventured into the northern woods, their path lit by the soft glow of Zora's talisman. The air grew colder as they moved deeper into the forest, and an eerie silence surrounded them. "This place feels wrong," Kalu muttered, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Zora knelt to examine the soil, which was dry and cracked despite the nearby streams. "The life here is being drained," she said. "The balance is shifting again." As they pressed on, they reached the old riverbed. The water had turned black, and its surface shimmered with an unnatural sheen. Nearby, a group of trees stood twisted and lifeless, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. "This is worse than I feared," Zora said. "The shadow is feeding on the forest." Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. From the riverbed, a dark figure emerged, its form shifting like smoke. It was larger than the shadow they had fought before, its presence radiating a cold, suffocating energy. "You should have stayed away," it hissed, its voice echoing through the forest. "This land belongs to me now." Kalu drew his sword, stepping in front of Zora. "We defeated you once. We'll do it again." The shadow laughed, a hollow, menacing sound. "You defeated a fragment of me. Now you face my true form." Zora gripped her talisman, her heart pounding. The battle was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. The shadow lunged forward, its form splitting into tendrils of darkness that lashed out at Zora and Kalu. Kalu swung his sword, the blade slicing through the tendrils, but they reformed almost instantly. "It's stronger this time," he yelled, stepping back to protect Zora. Zora raised her talisman, its light cutting through the shadows, but the figure only seemed to grow larger. "You cannot destroy me with light alone," it hissed. "I am born of greed, fear, and anger. I live in every heart that harbors such darkness." Zora's voice trembled, but she didn't falter. "Then we'll root you out, one shadow at a time." She knelt to the ground, pressing her hands to the soil. Whispering an incantation, she called upon the forest itself. The trees stirred, their branches groaning as they reached toward the shadow. The roots beneath the earth surged upward, wrapping around its smoky form. The shadow roared, thrashing against the binds. Kalu took the opportunity to charge, his sword glowing with the sapling's light. He plunged it into the shadow's core, and for a moment, the forest was filled with blinding light. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. But the riverbed remained black, and the trees around them were still lifeless. Zora sank to her knees, her energy spent. "It's not over," she said softly. "This was only a part of it. The real fight is with the darkness that lies within us all." Kalu helped her to her feet. "Then we'll keep fighting. Together." When Zora and Kalu returned to the village, they found a troubling sight. The villagers were arguing, their voices raised in anger. Some stood near the golden sapling, while others gathered around the elder. "This tree is a curse," one man shouted. "Ever since it appeared, we've faced nothing but danger." "The tree is our salvation," another villager countered. "Without it, we'd still be living in fear." Zora stepped forward, her voice firm. "Enough. The sapling is not to blame for our struggles. It reflects us, our unity, our choices." The crowd quieted, but the tension remained palpable. The elder approached Zora, his face lined with worry. "The shadow's influence is spreading, even here. People are growing distrustful, selfish." Zora looked at the villagers, her heart heavy. "We must remind them of what we're fighting for." The sapling's light can only thrive if we stand together. Kalu nodded. We need to rebuild trust. Let's gather everyone tonight and speak openly about what's happening. That evening, under the glow of the sapling, Zora and Kalu addressed the village. They spoke of their journey, the shadow they had faced, and the importance of unity. Slowly, the villagers began to share their fears, their hopes, and their commitment to protect the balance. As the night wore on, the sapling's light grew brighter, its golden glow a symbol of their renewed bond. But Zora knew their journey was far from over. The shadow still lingered, and its next move could be even more dangerous. Days passed, and the golden sapling seemed to thrive under the villagers' renewed unity. But as Zora walked through the village one morning, she noticed something unsettling, a strange grayish tint on the edges of some of the sapling's leaves. She touched one carefully, feeling a faint chill spread through her fingertips. She called Kalu, who was inspecting the warrior's training ground. "Look at this," she said, showing him the affected leaf. "The sapling is sick." Kalu frowned. "But we've kept the villagers united. Could the shadow be attacking it directly?" Zora nodded. "It's possible. The shadow feeds on more than emotions. It craves the energy of life itself. If we don't act, it could spread faster than before." That evening, Zora gathered the villagers. "We've made great strides in restoring balance," she said, her voice steady. "But our fight is far from over. The shadow is attacking the very heart of our land, the golden sapling. I need your help to protect it." The villagers murmured among themselves, a mix of fear and determination in their voices. The elder stepped forward. "Tell us what we must do." Zora explained the ritual she had read about in an ancient scroll, one that could strengthen the sapling's roots and ward off the shadow. It would require the cooperation of the entire village, their unity and energy focused on the tree. The villagers prepared for the ritual with solemn determination. They gathered herbs, flowers, and sacred items, arranging them in a circle around the sapling. Zora stood at the center, her talisman glowing faintly in the twilight. "Everyone, hold hands," she instructed. "Focus your thoughts on balance, on unity, on protecting what we've built together." As the villagers formed a circle, Zora began to chant. Her voice was soft at first, but it grew stronger, resonating with the rhythm of the earth. The sapling responded, its golden leaves trembling and glowing brighter. But as the ritual progressed, a cold wind swept through the village, carrying with it a faint, sinister laugh. The shadow's presence was unmistakable. "You think you can stop me with your little tree?" it hissed, its voice echoing through the air. The villagers tightened their grip on one another, their fear palpable but their resolve unshaken. Zora raised her voice, her chant growing louder, defying the shadow. The light from the sapling intensified, creating a protective barrier around the village. The shadow lashed out, its tendrils striking the barrier, but it couldn't break through. With a final, anguished scream, it retreated into the darkness. When the wind stilled and the light dimmed, the villagers looked at the sapling. Its leaves were golden once more, its energy vibrant. Zora lowered her hands, her body trembling with exhaustion. "We've won this round," she said, her voice faint but resolute. "But the shadow will return. We must stay vigilant." Kalu placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression filled with admiration and concern. "And we'll be ready when it does." The days that followed were deceptively calm. The golden sapling thrived, its light casting a warm glow over the village. But Zora couldn't ignore the lingering whispers in the wind, faint but menacing reminders that the shadow wasn't gone. One night, as she meditated near the sapling, the whispers grew louder, forming words that made her blood run cold. "You think you've won, little healer," the shadow sneered. "You've only delayed the inevitable. Balance is fleeting, and darkness will always find a way." Zora opened her eyes, her heart racing. She knew the shadow's taunts were meant to unnerve her, but there was a kernel of truth in its words. Balance was fragile, and the shadow's persistence suggested it had a deeper plan. The next morning, she shared her concerns with Kalu. "The shadow isn't retreating," she said. "It's regrouping. We need to understand its source, why it's so connected to this land." Kalu nodded. "Then we should consult the elders. They know the stories of our ancestors, the origins of this village. There may be something we've overlooked." The elders gathered in the village square, their faces etched with worry. Zora explained the shadow's growing strength and her need to understand its origins. One elder, a frail woman with eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom, stepped forward. "There is a legend," she began, her voice trembling. "Long ago, before this village was built, there was a guardian spirit that protected these lands. It was said to be a being of great power, but it vanished when the people became greedy and divided. Some say the shadow is what remains of that guardian, a corrupted form born of betrayal." Zora and Kalu listened intently as the elder continued. "If the legend is true, there is a shrine deep in the western forest, hidden beneath the roots of an ancient tree. It is said to hold the guardian's essence. Perhaps it holds the key to defeating the shadow." Without hesitation, Zora and Kalu prepared for the journey. They packed provisions, protective talismans, and a small vial of the golden sapling's essence. Before they left, the villagers gathered to wish them well, their faces a mix of hope and fear. The western forest was dense and silent, its towering trees blocking out most of the sunlight. Zora felt the weight of the air, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. As they ventured deeper, they encountered strange markings on the trees, symbols that seemed to pulse with a faint, otherworldly energy. "These are not natural," Kalu said, tracing one with his fingers. "They look like warnings." Zora nodded. "Or a guide." After hours of trekking, they reached a clearing where a massive tree stood. Its roots twisted and coiled around a stone altar, almost as if protecting it. The air around the tree felt alive, humming with an energy that made Zora's skin tingle. "This must be it," she whispered. As they approached the altar, a deep voice echoed around them. "Who dares disturb this sacred place?" A figure emerged from the shadows, its form flickering between solid and ethereal. It looked ancient, with eyes that glowed like embers and a presence that radiated both power and sorrow. "We seek the truth," Zora said, stepping forward. "The shadow threatens our land, and we believe you hold the answers." The figure studied her for a long moment before speaking. "The shadow is my grief, my anger. It was born when I was forgotten. If you wish to defeat it, you must first restore what was lost." Zora's heart raced. The path to saving her village had just become far more complicated and dangerous. The flickering figure stared at Zora and Kalu, its presence heavy with sorrow. "I was once the guardian of this land," it said, its voice like the wind through hollow trees. "I nurtured its people, its forests, and its waters. But greed and discord poisoned their hearts. They abandoned me, severing the bond that gave me purpose. The shadow is all that remains of my despair." Zora stepped closer, her compassionate gaze meeting the guardian's glowing eyes. "We can restore what was lost. The villagers are ready to rebuild the bond with this land. Tell us how to help you." The guardian hesitated, its form flickering as though caught between hope and doubt. "There is a way," it said finally. "But it requires a sacrifice, something of great value from your people. Only then can the shadow be fully vanquished." Kalu frowned. "What kind of sacrifice?" The guardian extended a ghostly hand, pointing toward the golden sapling. "Its essence, the light that binds your village together. If its power is offered to me, I can be restored. But your people must decide. Will they risk unity to heal this land?" Zora's heart sank. The sapling had become a symbol of hope for the village, a beacon that had guided them through darkness. Asking the villagers to give it up would be devastating. "We'll bring your message to them," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But there must be another way." The guardian's form began to fade, its voice a whisper. "Only the pure of heart can find another path. Look within, healer. The answer may lie closer than you think." Back in the village, Zora and Kalu called an urgent meeting. The villagers gathered around the sapling, their faces lit by its golden glow. Zora recounted the guardian's words, her voice heavy with the weight of the message. The elder was the first to speak. "The sapling has been our light in the darkest of times. If we lose it, will the shadow return stronger than before?" Another villager stepped forward. "Without the sapling, we'll lose what binds us together. But if the guardian can stop the shadow, isn't it worth the risk?" The crowd erupted into murmurs, fear and uncertainty rippling through them. Zora raised her hands, calling for silence. I understand your fears, she said. But this decision cannot be made lightly. The sapling represents unity, but true unity must come from within us, not from a tree. Kalu nodded. The guardian also spoke of another way. Zora and I will search for it, but we need your trust. If the time comes to make the sacrifice, it must be a choice we all agree on. The villagers reluctantly agreed, though doubt lingered in their eyes. That night, as the village slept, Zora sat beneath the sapling, her thoughts racing. She whispered to the tree, seeking guidance. To her surprise, the sapling responded. Its light flickered softly, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. A voice, faint but clear, echoed in her mind. The answer lies in your bond with the land. Seek the forgotten ties, and you will find the strength to heal all. Zora's heart leapt. There was hope after all, but it would require courage, faith, and a journey deeper into the unknown. Zora shared the sapling's cryptic message with Kalu the next morning. Together, they decided to explore the idea of forgotten ties. If there was a way to restore balance without sacrificing the sapling, they had to find it. The elder approached them as they prepared for their journey. There is a place, she said, her voice low. A sacred grove on the farthest edge of our lands. It is said that long ago, it connected all living things in our village. Perhaps what you seek is there. Zora and Kalu set out immediately, carrying talismans and supplies for the journey. The path to the grove was overgrown, the trail long abandoned. As they walked, the air seemed to hum with a faint energy, like a song barely remembered. When they reached the grove, they were awestruck. Massive trees with roots like woven baskets stood in a perfect circle, their leaves shimmering in hues of green and gold. In the center lay an ancient stone tablet, its surface etched with symbols. Zora knelt before the tablet, placing her hands on its cool surface. A surge of energy coursed through her, and images flooded her mind. Visions of the village as it once was, connected by an unbreakable bond to the land and the guardian spirit. She saw the bond shatter when greed and mistrust seeped into the people's hearts. The grove was the heart of the connection, she said, her voice trembling. If we can restore this place, we might restore the balance without sacrificing the sapling. Kalu placed a hand on her shoulder. Then let's find out how to awaken it. As Zora studied the symbols on the tablet, the ground beneath her trembled. A deep voice resonated through the grove. Who dares disturb the sacred ties of this land? Kalu stepped protectively in front of Zora, his sword drawn. But Zora placed a hand on his arm. We come to restore what was lost, she said calmly. We seek to heal the bond between our people and this land. A figure emerged from the largest tree, its form shifting between a glowing woman and a towering tree spirit. To restore the ties, you must prove your worthiness. The shadow thrives on fear, greed, and discord. To banish it, you must face the reflection of your greatest weaknesses. Zora and Kalu exchanged a glance. They knew this test would be unlike anything they had faced before, but they nodded in unison. We're ready, Zora said. The spirit extended her arms, and the grove transformed. Zora found herself standing alone in a misty void. Suddenly, she was surrounded by villagers, their faces filled with anger and betrayal. They accused her of failing them, of leading them to ruin. The words cut deep, but Zora steadied her breathing. She reminded herself of the truth, that she had acted with love and courage. I may not be perfect, she said aloud, her voice firm. But my heart is pure, and I will not let fear control me. The villagers' faces softened, and they dissolved into mist. Zora felt a warmth in her chest, a sign she had passed her trial. Elsewhere, Kalu faced his own trial. He stood before his family, who accused him of abandoning them for glory. Their voices echoed his own deepest doubts. But Kalu raised his head, his voice unwavering. I fight for what is right, not for myself but for my people. I will not be swayed. When the trials ended, they found themselves back in the grove, the spirit smiling. You have proven your worthiness. The bond can now be restored, but the final step requires the unity of your village. Zora and Kalu returned to the village with renewed determination. The final battle was near, and they would need everyone's strength to prevail. Zora and Kalu returned to the village as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the homes. The villagers gathered around them, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. Zora stood at the center of the crowd, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We found a way to restore the bond between the land and its people," she began. "But it requires all of us to act as one. The shadow feeds on fear, greed, and mistrust. To defeat it, we must prove that we are united in heart and purpose." The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. A man in the crowd stepped forward, his expression doubtful. "But how can we unite when the shadow has already sown so much fear? What if it's too late?" Kalu's voice rang out like a clarion call. "It's never too late to fight for what's right. Look around you. This village has survived storms, droughts, and the shadow's attacks. We are stronger together, but only if we believe in each other." Zora held up a vial of the golden sapling's essence. "This sapling's light represents what we can achieve when we are united. But its power alone isn't enough. The true power lies within us, within the bond we share with this land and with each other." Slowly, the villagers began to nod. An elder stepped forward, holding a staff adorned with symbols of the village's history. "We will follow you, Zora. If restoring the bond can save our home, then let us stand together." As the villagers prepared for the ritual to awaken the grove, Zora felt a surge of hope. The final confrontation with the shadow was near, but they were no longer fighting as individuals. They were a united force. At dawn, the entire village journeyed to the sacred grove. The atmosphere was electric, filled with anticipation and a tinge of fear. Zora led the procession, carrying the golden sapling in her hands. Kalu walked beside her, his sword strapped to his side, ready for any threat. When they reached the grove, the spirit emerged once more, its glowing form towering above the crowd. "You have come," it said, its voice resonating through the air. "To restore the bond, each of you must offer a piece of your essence. A token of your love, your courage, your connection to this land." The villagers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Zora stepped forward, her hands trembling but her resolve firm. "I will go first." She knelt before the stone tablet and placed the sapling at its center. Closing her eyes, she poured her energy into the ground, feeling the bond she shared with the village and the land around her. One by one, the villagers followed, each offering a token of their essence. Some laid down cherished objects, others spoke words of gratitude or prayers for their families. The grove began to glow, its light intensifying with each offering. But as the ritual neared completion, the shadow appeared, its form swirling like a storm. "You think you can banish me?" it roared, its voice filled with malice. "I am born of your weakness, your fear. You cannot escape me." Kalu drew his sword and stepped forward, his voice steady. "You are wrong. We are not weak, and we do not fear you. This village stands united, and together, we will defeat you." The villagers stood behind Kalu and Zora, their collective energy forming a barrier of light. The shadow lunged toward them, but the light of the grove flared, forcing it back. The final battle had begun, and the fate of the village hung in the balance. The shadow howled in fury, its dark tendrils lashing out against the villagers' barrier of light. The air crackled with energy as the sacred grove's glow intensified, fueled by the villagers' unity. Zora stood at the center, her hands clasped over the golden sapling as it pulsed with power. "You cannot destroy what you did not create," the shadow bellowed, its voice a thunderous roar. It split into multiple forms, surrounding the villagers. "Your light is fragile, your unity an illusion. I will tear it apart." Zora's voice rang out clear and unwavering. "Your power comes from the division you sow, but this village has chosen to stand as one. You will not defeat us." Kalu stepped forward, his sword gleaming with the light of the sapling. He charged at one of the shadow's forms, slicing through it. The shadow shrieked, its tendrils recoiling, but it was far from defeated. More forms emerged, each one more menacing than the last. The villagers held their ground, chanting words of unity taught to them by the elder. The grove's trees joined the battle, their roots rising to entangle the shadow's tendrils. Animals emerged from the forest, their eyes glowing with the same light as the grove. Even the earth seemed to rise against the shadow, forming barriers of stone and vines. Zora felt the sapling grow warmer in her hands. A voice echoed in her mind, the voice of the guardian spirit. The final blow must come from the bond. Unite their essence with yours, and you will banish the shadow forever. Zora called out to the villagers. We must give everything we have. Our love, our courage, our connection to this land. It's the only way to end this. The villagers formed a circle around the sapling, each placing a hand on the person beside them. Zora knelt at the center, her hands still cradling the sapling. She closed her eyes, focusing on the bond that connected them all. She could feel their fears, their hopes, and their determination flowing through her. Kalu stood guard, fending off the shadow's desperate attacks. Stay strong, he shouted, his voice like a rallying cry. We're almost there. The sapling began to glow brighter, its light spreading through the grove and into the villagers. The shadow screamed, its forms shrinking as the light consumed it. No, you cannot erase me. I am eternal. Zora's voice rose above the chaos. You are a part of us, but you do not define us. We choose light, love, and unity. With a final surge of energy, the sapling's light exploded outward, engulfing the shadow. The darkness writhed and twisted, its screams fading into silence as it dissolved into the earth. The grove fell still, bathed in a golden glow. The villagers opened their eyes, their faces filled with awe. The sapling had grown into a magnificent tree, its branches stretching toward the sky. The bond had been restored, and the land was whole once more. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the canopy of the sacred grove, the villagers stood in awe of the majestic tree that had sprouted from the golden sapling. Its leaves shimmered like liquid gold, and its branches hummed softly, as though singing a song of peace and unity. Zora and Kalu stood at the tree's base, their hands clasped. The guardian spirit appeared before them, her form now more vibrant and serene. You have done well, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. The bond is restored, and the shadow is no more. This tree will serve as a reminder of your courage and unity for generations to come. The villagers cheered, their voices filled with joy and relief. Many knelt before the tree, offering prayers of gratitude. The once tense atmosphere of the village had dissolved, replaced by a sense of harmony and hope. Kalu turned to Zora, his expression soft. You've not only saved the village but also reminded us of what truly matters. Our connection to one another. Zora smiled, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. We did it together, Kalu. This victory belongs to everyone. The journey back to the village was filled with celebration. The villagers sang songs of unity, their voices echoing through the forest. Even the animals joined in, their movements graceful and joyful as though they too understood the triumph. When they arrived, the once wilted fields were now bursting with life. Crops that had withered were vibrant again, and the river sparkled with an otherworldly clarity. The land seemed to pulse with renewed energy, a testament to the restored bond. Zora and Kalu were greeted as heroes, but Zora quickly reminded them, this victory is not ours alone. Every one of you contributed to this moment. Let this be a lesson that when we stand together, we can overcome anything. The king, Zora's father, embraced her tightly. You have brought honor to our family and saved our people. You are truly a blessing, my daughter. Kalu bowed respectfully to the king. Your daughter's wisdom and courage inspired us all, Your Majesty. It was her leadership that guided us to victory. The king nodded, his eyes filled with pride. Then you are both heroes in my eyes. Let us rebuild our village and move forward as a stronger, united people. The villagers began preparations for a grand feast to celebrate their victory and the dawn of a new era. But Zora knew their journey wasn't entirely over. The bond might be restored, but maintaining it would require vigilance, love, and unity for years to come. The village was alive with celebration as the grand feast began. Tables were lined with freshly harvested fruits and roasted meats, while the aroma of herbs and spices filled the air. Children danced around the fire, their laughter echoing through the night. For the first time in years, the village felt whole again. Zora sat beside Kalu at the head of the gathering, their smiles reflecting the warmth of the moment. The king stood to address the crowd, his voice strong and clear. Today, we celebrate not just the victory over darkness, but the triumph of unity and love. Let us remember this moment and carry its spirit forward. The villagers erupted in cheers, raising their cups high. Kalu leaned closer to Zora, his voice soft. "This is all because of you. Your heart, your wisdom. It brought us together." Zora shook her head gently. "It was the strength of all of us. I couldn't have done this alone. And neither could you." The guardian spirit appeared briefly, her translucent form glowing softly above the sacred tree. "You have restored the balance," she said, her voice carrying over the festivities. "But the bond must be nurtured. Protect it, and this land will thrive for generations." As the villagers danced and sang, Zora's thoughts turned to the future. There was joy now, but she knew challenges would come again. Yet, for the first time, she felt truly ready to face them, with Kalu by her side and the village united as one. The morning after the feast, the village awoke to a renewed sense of purpose. Zora and Kalu walked through the fields, marveling at the transformation. The crops were lush, the river sparkled like a mirror, and even the animals seemed more vibrant. "The land is healing," Zora said, her hand brushing over a stalk of maize. "It feels alive again." Kalu nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This isn't just a second chance for the land, it's a second chance for all of us. We have to make sure we don't take it for granted." The king called for a meeting in the village square. Standing before the villagers, he announced plans to ensure the bond was maintained. "We will hold a festival every year to honor the sacred tree and the unity it represents. And we will pass down the story of this victory to our children and their children, so they never forget the power of love and courage." Zora and Kalu were tasked with guiding the village in its new era. They began by organizing groups to tend to the sacred grove, teach the younger generation about the bond, and ensure that harmony was preserved. As the days passed, Zora felt a growing sense of peace. The darkness had tested them, but it had also strengthened their bonds. And as she looked into Kalu's eyes, she realized that their journey wasn't just about saving the village. It was about building a future together. Life in the village flourished over the weeks, but Zora couldn't ignore the faint whispers in her dreams. Each night, she saw fleeting shadows, not as terrifying as before, but lingering like remnants of something unfinished. Though the bond had been restored, her heart told her there was more to the story. Kalu noticed her unease one morning as they walked by the river. "You've been quiet," he said, his tone filled with concern. "Is something troubling you?" Zora hesitated before answering. "I've been having dreams. They're not nightmares exactly, but they feel important. Like the shadow left behind a secret we haven't uncovered yet." Kalu frowned, his hand instinctively moving to the hilt of his sword. "The shadow is gone. We all saw it disappear. But if you feel there's something more, we should investigate." The two visited the sacred tree, its golden leaves shimmering in the afternoon sun. Zora placed her hand on its trunk and closed her eyes. A vision flickered in her mind, a hidden cavern beneath the grove, filled with strange markings and a faint glow. When she opened her eyes, Kalu was already at her side. "What did you see?" he asked. "A place beneath the grove. We need to find it," she replied, her voice steady. As they began their search, Zora couldn't shake the feeling that the shadow had left behind a final test, one that would challenge their unity and courage once more. Zora and Kalu returned to the grove with tools and lanterns, joined by a few trusted villagers. Guided by Zora's vision, they searched for an entrance. After hours of digging near the roots of the sacred tree, they uncovered a stone slab etched with ancient symbols. "This must be it," Zora whispered, her fingers tracing the carvings. The symbols seemed to glow faintly under her touch, and the stone slid open with a deep rumble. The group descended into the cavern, their lanterns casting long shadows on the walls. The air was cool and damp, and the ground beneath them felt alive with energy. Strange markings covered the walls, and in the center of the cavern stood an altar surrounded by glowing crystals. Zora approached the altar cautiously. "This place feels powerful," she said. "But I don't think it was meant for evil. It's connected to the bond, but I don't understand how." As she spoke, the crystals began to pulse with light, and a low hum filled the cavern. A voice echoed around them, a deep, ancient voice that seemed to come from the very earth. "You have restored the bond, but your journey is not over. To truly protect the land, you must unlock the final seal. Only those with pure hearts and united spirits may succeed." Zora and Kalu exchanged a determined look. "We're ready," Kalu said firmly. The voice continued, The path ahead will test you in ways you cannot imagine. Prepare yourselves, for the true battle is yet to come. Zora and Kalu stepped forward, the crystal's pulsing light reflecting in their eyes. The voice spoke again, resonating with a commanding tone. To unlock the seal, you must face the test of courage. The darkness may no longer plague your land, but remnants of fear linger in every heart. Will you confront the shadows within? Zora placed her hand on the altar, her resolve unwavering. We will face whatever lies ahead, she said, glancing at Kalu, who nodded in agreement. The ground beneath them trembled, and the cavern walls seemed to dissolve, plunging them into a vast void. A swirling mist formed around them, shaping itself into a labyrinth of twisting paths. Shadows loomed on the walls, and whispers filled the air, echoes of fears and doubts that had once haunted them. Zora, Kalu said, gripping her hand tightly. This isn't real. It's trying to confuse us. Zora closed her eyes, summoning her inner calm. Stay close to me. We'll face it together. As they ventured deeper into the labyrinth, the shadows became more aggressive, forming shapes that mimicked their greatest fears. For Zora, it was the image of her family torn apart, her father crying out for her help. For Kalu, it was the sight of his strength failing him, leaving him powerless to protect those he loved. But they pushed forward, reminding each other of their strength and unity. The shadows aren't real. Zora called out, her voice steady. They only have power if we believe in them. The whispers faded, and the shadows crumbled into nothingness. A brilliant light erupted at the labyrinth's center, and the voice returned. You have passed the test of courage. The seal is one step closer to being unlocked. Before they could catch their breath, the scene around them shifted once more. They found themselves standing in a vast library, its walls lined with books that seemed to glow faintly. The voice echoed again, this time with a gentler tone. The second test is the test of wisdom. Knowledge is the key to sustaining the bond. Will you seek the truth, even when it is difficult to face? Zora's eyes sparkled as she surveyed the library. Wisdom is the foundation of healing, she murmured, stepping toward the nearest shelf. Kalu followed, though his expression was wary. Books are fine, but what are we looking for? The books began to float from the shelves, forming a circle around them. Words from the texts spilled into the air, creating riddles and puzzles. The first riddle appeared before them. What walks on 4 feet in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 at night? A man. The times of day represent a lifetime. As a baby he crawls, walks as an adult, and as an elderly man walks with a cane, Zora answered confidently. The book glowed brightly, then returned to the shelf. The next riddle appeared. I am something people celebrate or resist. I change people's thoughts and lives. I am obvious to some people, but to others, I am a mystery. What am I? Kalu thought for a moment before replying. Age. The words dissolved, and another book returned to the shelf. As they solved each riddle, the library seemed to shift and shimmer. Zora noticed that each riddle taught a lesson about balance, courage, and unity. When the final puzzle was solved, the voice spoke again. You have shown wisdom beyond your years. The second seal is now closer to being unlocked. The library faded, and they found themselves back in the cavern, standing before the altar. 2 of the crystals now glowed brighter, but the third remained dim. One final test remains, the voice said. The air in the cavern grew warmer as the voice spoke again, softer now. The final test is the test of love. The bond that holds this land together cannot endure without the strength of true, selfless love. Step forward and prove your hearts. Zora and Kalu exchanged a glance. Their bond had been tested before, but this challenge felt different. As they approached the altar, a shimmering portal opened before them, revealing a lush meadow bathed in golden light. The meadow seemed peaceful at first, but as they ventured further, they found themselves standing in front of 2 paths. One was covered in wild thorns and jagged rocks, while the other was smooth and inviting, leading to a distant glowing treasure. The voice returned. Only one of you may walk the thorned path. The other will take the smoother way. Choose wisely, for the thorned path leads to the heart of the bond, and the smoother one leads to temptation. Without hesitation, Kalu stepped toward the thorned path. I'll take this one, he said firmly, his voice filled with determination. No, Zora said gently, stepping in front of him. This isn't just about bravery, Kalu. Let me walk it. I have the strength to endure. Kalu frowned. Zora, you've already given so much for this village. Let me bear this burden. They stood in silence, their love for each other evident in their refusal to let the other suffer. Then, an idea struck Zora. What if we walk it together? She asked, taking his hand. The voice was silent, as if considering their proposal. Finally it said, love is not about sacrifice alone, but about unity. If you walk the path together, you will endure it as one. Hand in hand, Zora and Kalu walked the thorned path. Though the pain was sharp, their connection grew stronger with every step. By the time they reached the end, the meadow had transformed into a glowing field of light, and the final crystal shone brightly. Back in the cavern, the three crystals now pulsed in harmony, casting a radiant glow across the walls. The altar began to shift, revealing an ancient inscription etched into the stone. Unity, courage, wisdom, love. These are the pillars of balance. With them, the bond shall remain unbroken. The voice returned, this time filled with warmth. You have completed the tests and unlocked the final seal. The bond is now eternal, strengthened by your hearts and deeds. A wave of energy burst forth from the altar, traveling through the cavern and up into the sacred tree above. The ground trembled as the golden leaves of the tree glowed brighter than ever, their light spreading across the land. Rivers sparkled, crops flourished, and the entire village felt the surge of harmony. Zora and Kalu stood in awe as the guardian spirit appeared before them, her translucent form more vivid than ever. You have done what many thought impossible, she said. The bond is now safe, not just for this generation, but for all who come after. Your love, courage, and wisdom have saved us all. The villagers, drawn by the light, gathered around the sacred grove. When they saw Zora and Kalu emerge from the cavern hand in hand, a cheer erupted. The king stepped forward, tears of pride in his eyes. My daughter, he said, embracing Zora. You have brought honor to our family and hope to our people. Kalu bowed his head. We did it together, Your Majesty. This victory belongs to everyone. As the villagers celebrated, Zora looked at Kalu, her heart full. The trials had tested them in every way, but they had emerged stronger, their love a beacon for all to see. With the village united and the bond restored, life began to settle into a joyful rhythm. The sacred tree stood as a symbol of their renewed harmony, and Zora's healing abilities were celebrated even more widely. Yet, despite the calm, Kalu's heart was restless. He had come to realize that Zora was more than just a partner in their trials. She was his heart's true companion. One evening, under the golden glow of the sacred tree, Kalu took Zora for a walk. The village children had hung lanterns in the branches, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blossoms. Zora, wearing a simple gown of green, looked like a goddess of the earth itself. Zora, Kalu began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. When we faced the tests, I realized something important. You weren't just the reason I succeeded, you were my strength. Every step we took together felt like it was meant to be. Zora turned to him, her kind eyes softening. Kalu, we've been through so much. You've shown me what it means to trust and to fight for something greater than ourselves. Taking a deep breath, Kalu knelt on one knee, holding out a simple gold ring he had commissioned from the village smith. Zora, will you do me the honor of standing by my side for the rest of our lives? Will you marry me? Zora's heart swelled, and tears glistened in her eyes. Yes, Kalu, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. There's no one else I'd rather share my life with. The villagers, who had been quietly observing from the shadows, erupted in cheers, rushing forward to congratulate the couple. The joyous celebration began that very moment, as plans for the grand wedding were set in motion. The village buzzed with excitement as preparations for the royal wedding began. Zora's father, the king, declared it a celebration for the entire kingdom. Messengers were sent to neighboring villages, inviting everyone to the grand event. The sacred grove was chosen as the venue, symbolizing the unity and love that had restored their land. Zora's sisters took charge of designing her dress, a masterpiece of flowing silk and delicate embroidery, adorned with golden leaves to honor the sacred tree. Her mother oversaw the feast, ensuring that every delicacy the kingdom could offer would be served. Meanwhile, Kalu worked with the villagers to decorate the grove, stringing lanterns and weaving garlands of flowers. Despite the flurry of activity, Zora found herself reflecting on how much her life had changed. As she prepared herbal blessings for the ceremony, she thought of how the trials had shaped her into someone stronger and wiser. The night before the wedding, the king called Kalu to the palace. "Kalu," he began, his tone serious but warm, "you've proven yourself to be brave, wise, and honorable. As Zora's father, I couldn't ask for a better man to stand by her side. Tomorrow, I will give her hand to you with pride." Kalu bowed deeply. "Your Majesty, I will spend my life honoring her and the bond we share." The king nodded, placing a hand on Kalu's shoulder. "That is all I ask." The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear. The entire village gathered at the sacred grove, dressed in their finest clothes. Musicians played joyous melodies, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. Zora, radiant in her gown, walked arm in arm with her father toward the altar. Kalu stood waiting, dressed in a regal tunic of deep blue, his expression a mix of awe and love. As the king placed Zora's hand in Kalu's, he spoke words that resonated with everyone present. "Today, I give my daughter's hand to a man who has proven his worth not just to me, but to our entire kingdom. May their union be as strong and enduring as the bond that holds our land together." The village elder officiated the ceremony, speaking blessings over the couple. When Zora and Kalu exchanged their vows, their words were heartfelt and sincere, drawing tears from many in the crowd. As they sealed their union with a kiss, the sacred tree's leaves shimmered with golden light, as if blessing the marriage itself. The wedding feast was a celebration like no other. Villagers danced and sang late into the night, their joy filling the air. Zora and Kalu sat together, their hands entwined, watching the festivities with hearts full of gratitude. As the night wore on, the couple slipped away to stand beneath the sacred tree. Its golden leaves rustled gently in the breeze, and the glow of the lanterns cast a warm light around them. "Kalu," Zora said softly, resting her head on his shoulder, "our journey was filled with challenges, but it brought us here. I can't imagine a more perfect ending, or beginning." Kalu smiled, pulling her close. "Zora, as long as we're together, every challenge will be worth it. You are my home." The couple looked out over the village, now thriving and united, and knew they were ready to face whatever the future might bring. Their love, like the sacred bond of the land, was unbreakable. And so, Zora and Kalu began their new life together, their story one that would be told for generations. A tale of courage, unity, and the enduring power of love. Moral of the story: love, courage, wisdom, and unity are the foundations of a strong and enduring bond. When faced with challenges, true strength lies in standing together and trusting in each other. Remember, light will always overcome darkness. Thank you for watching. Did you enjoy Zora and Kalu's journey? Like, share, and subscribe for more captivating African tales filled with lessons of love, bravery, and moral lessons. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below.